Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 421. Vishnu's green eyes wavered. The two were staring into each other's eyes. Vishnu felt like someone was reading his mind for the first time in his life. He shouldn't have come. Even though the subject was omitted, Wu Yun knew exactly who he was talking about. Why? You won't get the results you want. Wu Yun approached Vishnu and leaned against the railing. So don't meet her and just go. Before it's too late. At those words, Vishnu was certain. The reason Wu Yun was here was to stop him. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I can see fate. He did believe him, because it was none other than Vishnu. But the fate he was talking about wasn't as grand as the word itself. I can see fate, but it's only fragmentary. Regardless of whether you believe me, why are you telling me this? I saw fate, the long, red thread. When he saw the fate at the end of the thread, Vishnu decided to join this battle. An inevitable fate. What was it? I can't tell you. Why? The moment I say it, fate will change. And it will change for the worse. Wu Yun had never seen the fate that Vishnu was talking about. So he didn't know what fate was or why he shouldn't talk about it. But not only now, but in the distant future. Vishnu had never once revealed the fate he had seen to anyone. To prevent that, can't you find another way? There is no other way. He shook his head resolutely. As if he had expected that, Wu Yun sighed. There was no way to persuade this old man. He had absolute faith in the fate he had seen. More than anything else. The problem is that this fate is always right. Wu Yun hadn't expected this situation. Vishnu had seen fate. Even if it was just fragmentary information, if the accuracy of the information was 100%, it was not something to be ignored. Judging from the way Vishnu is talking, it's definitely not a good fate. Vishnu said he was moving to prevent that fate. Vishnu saw Wu Yun's profile and expression. After thinking for a while, Wu Yun asked a question. When exactly are you talking about? When? I'm talking about the timing. Is it today, tomorrow, or a few years from now? Vishnu looked bewildered. Thinking that his explanation was lacking, Wu Yun added. I'm asking when the fate you were trying to stop is. What are you going to do if you know? You said that if you tell me my fate, it will change for the worse. After some thought, Wu Yun came up with a workaround. He wasn't sure if it would work yet. If you just tell me when it is, I'll figure it out. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Wu Yun's eyebrows twitched. There wasn't much time left. The situation wasn't very good for him to relax. I have to hurry. He didn't know what would happen. But there must be a reason why Vishnu was talking like this. Even if it was just to prevent Vishnu from making a hasty choice, he had to stop what was going to happen tomorrow. Time is running out. I told you, there's no other way. You're the one who doesn't have a way. Not me. You have a way. You, who don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to start looking for it now. Thud. Wu Yun put his hand on Vishnu's shoulder. So you, just stay put until tomorrow. Wu Yun, who had been speaking, turned his head. The creepy murderous intent he had been feeling earlier had begun to openly target him. Thud. The force behind the light footsteps was extraordinary. The handsome man with neatly combed black hair had a very threatening aura despite his thin body. His face looked just like a young Hades. He approached Wu Yun and Vishnu, revealing his murderous intent. What do you mean, stay put? For some reason, he had been eavesdropping on their conversation, but he wondered why he had been so quiet. Instead of answering the guy's question, Yuan looked at Vishnu as if he was disappointed. Do I friend summon you? That guy has a really hot temper. Vishnu sighed as if he didn't want the situation. Runaway for no if you didn't want Todi. If you do so, you might be alive because you listened to me. You're not destined Todi yet. That's obvious. Why would I die? Yuan started a Theman approaching him, sprinkling dark attribute magic. The moment they saw him, information about a high ranker came to mind. Shiva, the 1/5th ranked high ranker, the leader of the Devas. There are 3 guild masters in the Devas. Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. Their rankings are different, but they have equal positions in the devas. They never act together and hand over the guild master position to each other once every few thousand years. They have made the devas into the strongest guild comparable to Asgard. And the current leader of the devas is Shiva. Hey was the black-haired man in front of him. Clack, Shiva's two die in front of Yuan. It was only about 5 steps away. And for a top-tier high ranker such as Shiva, that distance was practically nothing. You're not going to run away. Running away. The corners of Yuan's mouth went up. An expression of ridicule. If this Giho lives out of the world is like this, you must know me. I know y'all. You're the most famous ranker in this tower for the past few years. Of course, Shiva knew about Yuan. Unlike Vishnu Brahma, who hadn't been active for thousands of years, held the devas. He had to have information about Yuan. Kim Yuan, the 11th ranked high ranker. You didn't belong to any guild, but you have a close relationship with Muram, the Demon King, and Olympus. You also received recognition from the King of Asgard, Odin. Ooh, Vishnu looked at Yuan with slight admiration. He had thought he wasn't that famous. Buddha was actually the 11th ranked high ranker. He guessed he had been living out of the world for too long. But what does that matter? As if rankings didn't matter, Shiva showed his Santanto kill with all the citation, his eyes gleaming. Ice the ranking inflated, or maybe the administration thinks highly of your potential. But what you say just now is arrogant. He had been eavesdropping on the conversation between Vishnu and Yuan. At that thought, Yuan sighed and looked back at Vishnu. I guess I have a chance to friend summon, too. Vishnu smiled faintly at Yuan's words, who remained composed in even this situation. It was a fun situation he had seen in a long time, of course. As per his permission, you did well to follow me. Goo. The sky of Valhalla turned red, an uninvited guest joined the three, including Yuan. It would be Shemeta fight. Thud, if Vishnu had followed Shiva. Diablo had followed Yuan, who had gone out to the balcony. Shiva looked at Diablo, who was smitting an aura. Art-haired giant. His crimson red, bloodthirsty eyes looked like they could kill people just by looking at them. It was an impression that was no hard to forget, even after seeing it once. Areu Diablo, weary old acquaintances. Both of them were at the letters of huge guilds. They had only seen each other once in passing, but Shiva and Diablo had seen each other once. At that time, Shiva, who was the guild master of the Devas, was interested in the Heavenly Demon War. I heard you finished the Heavenly Demon War without our help. You said you would do it on your own, but you ended up reaching out to humans. Didn't talk nonsense when you know nothing. This guy is shelf demon. Horn slowly began to sprout over Diablo sheet, who was very irritated. That's why he became a Thescond in commando for demons. That means if you try to touch Yuan, you should be prepared to face the Demon King. And Diablo was looking forward to that more than anyone else. Ever since he first encountered Shiva in the past. Diablo had been looking forward to the day he would fight him. I hate talkers, you see. So stop grinding your teeth in. Diablo's eyes widened. A fist suddenly filled his vision. Bam, quang, hit in the face by the fist, Diablo's body flew up, ignoring gravity, and crashed into the floor of the balcony. It all happened in an instant. It was a move so fast that even Yuan, who wasn't using the fire eyes of truth, couldn't see it properly. No, he skipped the distance. Like the spatial movement technique, Shukuchiho, which folds the ground and moves through space. Shiva didn't jump towards Diablo with his feet, he literally skipped through space and reached out to him with his fist. It was a unique ability. If he had such an ability, he would never lose to anyone in terms of speed alone. On top of that, he had the strength to blow away the incredibly tough and strong Diablo with one blow. I guess rankings can't be trusted. Diablo, who had been blown away, got up from the ground. He should have been in a bad mood, but instead, he smiled even more broadly than before. They say you're 15th. Diablo had met many high rankers. But even from just one move, he could tell that the ranking was just a numbers game. Screech. Diablo's horns rose high above his head. The color of the reddened sky grew deeper. Diablo had decided to reveal his true form to fight Shiva. A tense situation. Bam. Yuan and Vishnu moved at the same time and stepped between the two. Let's stop this now. Are you going to destroy the castle? Vishnu stood in front of Shiva, and Yuan in front of Diablo. Unlike Diablo, who looked confused, Shiva nodded obediently to Vishnu's words. Don't do anything useless. I know. Vishnu glanced at Yuan. It wasn't a long story. But Yuan's words had definitely stuck in his throat like a thorn. Let's go. Hey, where are you going? The moment Diablo shook off Yuan and tried to rush towards Shiva. Swish. The figures of Shiva and Vishnu disappeared like a mirage. Diablo, who had taken out his horns and raised his magic, suddenly lost all strength in his body and laughed in vain. Did they run away? You're the one who got hit, so it's hard to say they ran away. Thud. Yuan, who had confirmed that Shiva and Vishnu had disappeared, began to walk. Diablo, who had come out to the balcony with great anticipation for a fight, asked with a pout as Yuan was about to leave. Where are you going? I'm not going to fight this time, so don't follow me. Where are you going? Yuan jumped down from the balcony. He thought he should leave before the annoying guy followed him. Yuan, who had fallen from the balcony and landed in Valhalla's garden, walked out of the castle. Vishnu and Shiva met. From the moment Vishnu started moving, the meeting between the two had been scheduled. It was impossible to separate the two by force. For now, I need to find out about the sudden variable. Creak. Yuan's eyes gleamed gold as the future began to unfold before him. What fate did Vishnu see? Chapter 422. Goo. Aside from the fact that a great magi enveloped the castle of Valhalla, the sky that was occasionally visible through the windows was covered in red. Some rankers had difficulty breathing and unnaturally gasped for air with their hands over their mouths. What is going on? I guess there is a fight outside. How dare those guys? However, this is Asgard. And among them, it was a place where high rankers from various large guilds gathered for harmony. They immediately decided to go out to the balcony and sort out the situation. Of course, those who knew the meaning of the red sky did not dare to think so. It will be okay. Odin's words filled the room. The feet of the rankers who were moving stopped. And as soon as Odin's words fell, the color of the sky changed again. Swoosh, clatter, clatter. The magi that had been pressing down on their bodies disappeared and the sky returned to its blue color. Their gazes were focused back on Odin, as if watching the situation outside from within here. Odin already knew that the fight would be over. Then, can I continue my story? To Odin's question on the podium, the audience nodded one by one. A formal occasion, a greeting for the executives of the large guilds that had illuminated the occasion and the famous rankers scattered throughout the tower. It was a boring occasion, but it was an occasion that he could not help but prepare as the king of a country. That guy has also started to move. Odin nodded after glancing out the window. Vishnu and Shiva had met. Everyone here thought of this place where a speech for harmony was taking place, as a historical place, but it was not. The historical moment was taking place outside where the red sky had unfolded, not inside here. Are you Vishnu of Deva? When he first met Vishnu, Mimir, who accompanied Odin, said while holding his hand. You are a half-baked person. Odin looked at Mimir as if asking what he meant. Half-baked. It was an impolite thing to say, but he did not think that Mimir, who was smarter than anyone else in this tower, would say such a thing for no reason. As expected, I see that you are the same as me, Mimir. Vishnu told his story like that. Odin, who had been listening to the story with his ears wide open, was able to shake off the question he had been holding for a long time. That's how it happened. Mimir was also surprised. He did not have the ability to see fate like Vishnu, but thanks to the curse of knowledge, he had anticipated most of the things that would happen in the future. However, even he had not anticipated Vishnu's story. But why are you telling us this story? That time will come someday. When, if something goes wrong, you may have to come forward. What fate did Vishnu see at that time? It would not have been a mere illusion that the conversation at that time felt like an omen of an ominous future. It was the same even now. During the harmony, perhaps because of the red sky created by Diablo, Odin felt a chill in his heart. I've never been wrong about a bad feeling like this. At times like this, he usually had to stop whatever it was. The intuition of a high ranker like Odin was sometimes more accurate than objective circumstances or evidence, even though it was dismissed as a mere hunch. However, he couldn't do that when he thought about the guy's cries. Odin resumed his speech, which he had paused for a moment. His mouth was moving, but the thought that had once come to his mind did not easily go away. And so the first day of the harmony passed. After Odin's speech, the banquet hall was once again filled with a place for friendship between the guilds. A Liangjian, who had come to a crowded place for the first time in a long time, smiled on the outside but grimaced on the inside. It's noisy. As a general of heaven, he had done all sorts of evil things. But without a doubt, none of the fights had been as hard as this. Having to make unwanted expressions and say insincere things to people. There was no such hardship as this. As he was drinking expensive wine that did not suit his taste with the rankers of the various guilds. Lord Liangjian. Someone handed a Liangjian gun, who turned his head, a bottle of clear and strong liquor. Nice to meet you. It's been a long time. A handsome man with black hair and a bright smile. Shiva, you've changed a lot. Since I had the honor of meeting you, I've been a little more careful. Shiva laughed heartily and shook the bottle slightly. General Arangun put down the cup he was holding and took the bottle that Shiva handed him. It was a strong liquor that the celestial soldiers usually enjoyed. Thank you. You must have suffered only drinking that watered-down alcohol. The drinks vary depending on the floor. Valhalla's alcohol was also excellent. He said that, but General Arangun smiled as he received the alcohol that Shiva had given him. The alcohol in Valhalla was so bland that it tasted like water to General Arangun. Cuck, this is good. General Arangun drank the alcohol with pleasure, and only then did he notice the green-haired man next to Shiva. His face somewhat resembled Shiva's. However, his gaze and the atmosphere he exuded were completely different. Who is that? Ah, let me introduce you. This is Vishnu. Vishnu. General Arangun's eyes flashed. If he was Vishnu, he was the guild master who had founded Deva and was considered to be the oldest ranker along with Odin. Even though he had been inactive for a long time, allowing other guild masters to take the lead, the Rank Management Bureau ranked him as the third highest ranker, just below Odin. Wow, you're with a big shot. Haha, aren't you a big shot yourself, General Arangun? You're the one leading the current heavenly realm. No, not really. Anyway, it's nice to meet you. I'm Arangun. I'm Vishnu. Vishnu grabbed the hand that General Arangun offered him. General Arangun's eyes lit up for a moment at the delicate and soft hands that were like a child's. It was nice to meet you. Let's see each other often in the future. General Arangun finished the greeting hastily and waved the bottle in his hand. I'll drink this well. I understand. Then, I'll be going. Shiva bowed to General Arangun and moved away. As he watched Shiva greeting other rankers, the general next to General Arangun whispered. He seems much more polite than I heard. Well, I'm not sure. General Arangun looked at the bottle that Shiva had given him. Is he a good person or a hypocrite? At the height of the peace meeting, Yuan hurriedly returned to his quarters. Heracles, who shared the accommodation with him, hadn't returned yet. That was to be expected. He was currently attending the harmony as the Prince of Olympus. He must be having a hard time. His awkward expression while standing next to Zeus was still vivid in his mind. Once upon a time, they were in a father-son relationship where they tried to kill each other, so that must be difficult. Even now, Heracles must still be burning with anger towards Zeus, who drove his mother, Alcmene, to her death. Thud, Yuan climbed onto the spacious bed and sat down. From Yuan's shadow, who had chosen the most comfortable spot, a pitch-black figure rose. What is it? Susanoo monitored his surroundings as soon as he appeared. The interior of the accommodation was safer than anywhere else, without any enemies in sight. It was strange that he was summoned here, a place where he was once called the best swordsman in the tower. I have something for you to do. What is it? Just stand guard next to me for a while. What? His face crumpled. A sense of displeasure was conveyed to Yuan, as if he was asking if he had summoned him just to do something like that. Susanoo, the best in the world. He was using him as a mere escort. Call someone else. I don't want to get involved in something that's not up to my level. I can't call anyone else. Why not? Because there's no one I can trust as much as you. What? Russell. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly on his expressionless face. Susanoo quickly returned to his original expression and nodded. If you're asking me like that, then fine. Susanoo stood in front of Yuan. He looked quite sturdy. However, he never thought that he would change his mind with just a few words of praise. He's surprisingly simple. Susanoo was in a position where he had to do whatever Yuan told him to do anyway. However, due to the nature of the undead summon, he tended to perform better when his soul voluntarily did what it wanted. That's why he had said those words on a whim. Well, whatever. He felt reassured with Susanoo guarding him. He was powerful enough to protect him for a while, even if the foolish ontology of chaos targeted him directly. With that, Yuan sat there with his eyes open. Creak. Eye of Prophecy is activated. As the skill was activated, a different scenery unfolded before Yuan's eyes than before. At first, it was a very subtle difference. Susanoo, who was circling around Yuan, would occasionally look out the window. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The scenery that would happen in a very short while. The scenery changed into dozens, hundreds, and approached Yuan's eyes. This is where it gets important. Swish, one of Yuan's eyes turned red. Through the fire and gold eyes, among the near infinite possibilities that unfolded before his eyes, those that were close to reality were chosen. One of these many possibilities. And the fate that Vishnu had seen, which would happen tomorrow, had to be confirmed. It's the first time I've checked this far into the future. In units of seconds, minutes, and even the future in units of hours. As he began to see the distant future with his eyes, Yuan felt a pain in his head again. Throbbing. A throbbing head and a queasy stomach. No matter how strong his body had become, it was never easy to see this far into the future. It's not easy. Fortunately, though, along with the physical strengthening technique, Yuan's body had transformed into a different being from before by breaking through the ceiling and reaching divinity. The throbbing in his head was just a slight crack in his confidence that he would be able to handle the eye of prophecy freely by now. It wasn't so bad that he couldn't bear it because it was difficult. It feels like I'm time traveling. His body would still be sitting on the bed, but it didn't feel like it at all. Flying in the middle of a dark, gravity-less universe, with fragments of time passing by around him. Night passed and day dawned. And so, the next day, the day when the major high-rankers of the guild invited by Odin gathered in one place, came. This is throbbing. The headache got worse. It was gradually becoming difficult to endure. And so, the countless possibilities that had been unfolding before his eyes disappeared, and only one scenery surrounded Yuan. The proficiency of the eye of prophecy has increased dramatically. It's not a mere possibility. The result of using the eye of prophecy for a long time and concentrating on concentration. The result of what will happen the next day. Crash. At the end of it, the door swung open. Chapter 423. In an instant, the tens of thousands, hundreds of millions of scenes that had unfolded before his eyes vanished, swallowed by a bright light. There was only one scene that appeared after that. Not a possibility, but a certain future. The truth seen through the eye of prophecy. Proficiency of eye of prophecy has risen sharply. At the message that appeared once again, Wu Jin looked at the scenery unfolding before his eyes. It was Valhalla tomorrow, and this is. His eyes opened wide at the scenery that began to unfold within it. Why is it already? Lord Zeus has returned. Is there a greater blessing upon Olympus than this? You have answered the call of Asgard, which has imprisoned you. You are truly deep. Ha ha ha, thank you. Please come and visit Olympus next time. I will treat you well so that you will not be disappointed. Obvious flattery that was clear to the eye. And to that, Zeus greeted them with hearty laughter. Around him stood Zeus' children, including Hercules, Apollo, Artemis, and Hargan. A boring and uncomfortable time. It has been a long time, Apollo. Agni, I knew you would come. I heard there was a big incident on the first floor. It seems that this meeting was created because of that incident. It was a big deal. You must have had a hard time. Later, let's talk about it in more detail. Of all Zeus' children, Apollo was the one who was best at dealing with people. Apollo was the high ranker who had been mentioned the most as Zeus' successor, until Hercules appeared. This kind of conduct was a skill that he had learned a long time ago. Are you uncomfortable? Hercules nodded at Hargan's question as he approached. Very much so. Me too. I'm not really a fan of these kinds of places. It seems you don't have an aptitude for politics either. Rather than drinking tasteless alcohol in such an uncomfortable place, I'd rather fight the enemy. Hercules chuckled. He had met someone who was a little comfortable, even in such an uncomfortable place. Where did Wu Jin go? We parted ways as soon as we got here. He said there was no place for him to be seen. He pushed you away. He pushed me away. Don't resent him too much. Even though I don't know him as well as my brother, I do know him a little. He must have something in mind. Something in mind. Hercules glanced at Zeus. His father was greeting the executives of the other guilds one by one. After Hades left and he sat on the throne of Olympus once again, he looked no different than he had in the past. I know what he's thinking. Yes, he wants us to reconcile. Because we need our father's strength. Zeus' strength was such that it was difficult to find an equal. Originally, he was already powerful enough to fight against two of the three gods, including Heracles, all at once. After he lost his lightning powers and his rank dropped, he obtained Indra's powers and divinity. Now, he had become much stronger and had a higher rank than he had in his prime. It was literally a new golden age. Although he had also obtained divinity, Heracles felt that Zeus before him was still beyond his grasp. Is it simply because you need power? Hargan's gaze also turned to Zeus. Although he must have noticed their gazes, Zeus paid them no attention. Was he deliberately ignoring them, or was there another thought deep within him? Hargan wondered why Yuan had sent Heracles to Zeus. It can't be just that. Then, you know, right, he's not the kind of guy who would bring anyone to his side just because he needs power. Right, of all the people Heracles had seen, Yuan was the smartest. He was the one who had shown him the world, who had lived in the well of Olympus. Also, he was the one who had stood one step ahead of Zeus, who seemed to know everything in this world and had turned Olympus upside down. What is he thinking again? Seriously, it would be better if he would just tell me what he's thinking. Heracles sat down and drank with Hargan. He kept gulping down the alcohol that didn't even get him drunk because he was so bored. How much time passed like that? Heracles turned his head at the presence he felt behind him and was surprised. Zeus had approached him first. What is it? I have something to say. Follow me for a moment. At Zeus' gesture, Heracles wondered what this meant and looked at him without answering for a moment. On one side, Hargan winked at him with one eye, signaling him to go well. And he pursed his lips into the shape of a mouth. Good luck, bro, he sent a message of encouragement that Zeus couldn't hear. And then, Hargan, yes, you come with me too. Zeus turned around and started walking. Wondering what was going on, Hargan looked back at Heracles with a tearful face and asked him for help. Then, cheer up, little brother. Heracles pushed his hand away. It was late at night. After meeting Zeus with Hargan for quite some time, Heracles walked with a thoughtful face. I have something to tell you. Zeus set the mood under the sky where the sunset was beginning. Hargan, facing such Zeus, asked in a frozen voice. Is there something you want to say to only the two of us? Yes. Unlike the nervous Hargan, Heracles' reaction was cold. What do you want this time? His tone and expression were fierce. Hargan, who was right next to him, had a reaction that made it hard to breathe. In fact, Hargan was so choked up by those words that he ended up kneeling on the floor, waiting for Zeus' answer. Isn't your brother next to you having a hard time? Boom. With one gesture from Zeus, the presence that had been emanating from Heracles' body was erased. Hargan, who had just managed to catch his breath, gasped for air. Heracles looked at Zeus with curious eyes. Someone who, in the past, wouldn't have cared if his child was choking or suffocating. Why? Has he changed? A father like a father. He couldn't imagine Zeus like that. Besides, even if Zeus had changed, Heracles had no intention of shaking hands and reconciling with him. Besides, there's no way. Zeus' next words were still far from making him think of him as a warm father. People don't change that easily. Especially for a high ranker like Zeus, who had lived for thousands of years. Heracles headed towards his quarters at a slow pace, tidying his long thoughts. Deep into the night, as Heracles was opening the door to his quarters, he felt a creepy feeling in the nape of his neck. What is it? Don't go in recklessly. A voice full of power. Heracles turned his head and saw Susanoo with a pale complexion. He knew that he was Yuan's summoner because he had fought him before. Is Kim Yuan inside? He is. So, he told me not to let anyone in. Kim Yuan. Heracles looked at the closed door with curious eyes. What on earth was going on inside? Susanoo, Yuan's summoner, wouldn't harm Yuan, and if he had given the order, there must be a reason. Got it. Swoosh. Heracles pushed Susanoo's kusanagi with his fingertips. Even so, you shouldn't be holding this out like this. Isn't it dangerous? It's awkward for you to say that, of all people. Susanoo thought back to when he fought Heracles. It was the first time in a long time that he had enjoyed swordsmanship. Heracles was a shocking and unfamiliar opponent for Susanoo, who had been known as the sword demon for thousands of years. A body that could not be cut. It was as if he was hitting solid steel with his sword, and he wondered what on earth he was fighting against. It'll be different next time. Heracles, who was standing one step away from the door with his back against the wall, raised his head. It'll be different. What does he mean? That solid body. Susanoo glared at Heracles, his eyes glowing blue. I'll definitely cut it down. Really? Thud, thud. Heracles tapped Susanoo on the shoulder. I don't know if we'll ever fight again. Heracles brushed past him, and Susanoo glared at him, but did not immediately draw his sword. Heracles meant Yuan no harm, and Susanoo knew he was no match for Heracles if they were to fight right now. So, Susanoo and Heracles stood in front of Yuan's door, arms crossed. Suddenly, oh my god, a group of players walking up the stairs were shocked to see Susanoo and Heracles facing each other. They had to pass between them to get to their rooms. The players gulped and turned around. Heracles watched them go, then shook his head. Do I have to keep doing this? If you want to go in, you have to defeat me. What a loyal subordinate. Heracles sighed and pushed himself off the wall. I can't stay here. He was bothering people coming and going. Susanoo would keep glaring at him as long as he was there. Heracles decided to wait somewhere else until Yuan came out. And then, creak, the door to the room Yuan was in opened. I knew you'd hear me. Thud, Yuan came out. Yuan looked at Susanoo and Heracles, who were glaring at each other, and rubbed his tired eyes. What are you doing? Nothing. Did you fight? Heracles shrugged and gestured to Susanoo. Yuan understood what had happened. What about you? Why didn't you let him in? I did some divination. Divination? Did you talk to Zeus? You seemed uncomfortable. Heracles' face darkened. It was rare to see Heracles like this. It meant he was in a very bad mood. Don't do anything useless like that again. Heracles waved his hand and walked past Yuan into the room. I never asked you a question. Swish. Yuan stepped to the side and blocked Heracles' path. I'm sorry, but I can't let that go. What? I have something to ask you. Yuan was glad to see Heracles when he came out of the room. He had a strong ally on his side now. Where is Zeus? Chapter 424. Zeus looked up at the sky. A clear sky without a single cloud in sight. The clouds supporting his back shone in the moonlight. Swish. His closed eyes slowly opened. As if he had been waiting for it. The guest he had been waiting for had come to find him. You've come. Unlike his gentle tone of voice, his eyes, which were revealed when his eyelids peeled back, were full of hostility. Crackle, sizzle, golden currents of electricity began to flow around Zeus. Rumble, thunder roared in the clouds and an untimely downpour poured down below them. Regardless, Zeus stood on the clouds. As he turned his body, someone was standing with him in the empty sky. I thought you wouldn't come. A faceless man with a robe over his head. Foolish chaos. He greeted Zeus with his hands together, facing him. As expected, you are above my head. You've gotten smaller. That's all I can do right now. In Zeus's eyes, foolish chaos looked small and shabby like a clown. He was like a candle that would disappear before his eyes with just a flick of his hand, not even needing to create lightning. But it's not bad enough, is it? I'm not here to fight anyway. How long do you plan to hide behind that fake appearance? If I really came before you. Whoosh. Foolish chaos approached Zeus and tilted his head. Are you confident that you can handle it? Quote. In the dark robe, it should have been visible at a glance, but it wasn't. As if there was nothing inside, foolish chaos's face was hidden in the robe. It was within reach, but we'll find out when the time comes. As expected, your confidence is the best. I wonder if your mouth will float if I cut it off and throw it in the water. Ha ha ha. With an awkward laugh, foolish chaos passed Zeus. Is there anything you want? If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have waited to see you again. Oh, you must be embarrassed to talk for a long time. Then hurry up and tell me. The two talked with their backs to each other. When Zeus finished speaking, foolish chaos opened his mouth with a chuckle, as if he had expected it. You and him, you both tell very interesting stories. Him, swish. Zeus turned his body and looked back at foolish chaos. There was one person who had told him the same story. There was only one person he could think of. Is it Kim Yu-won again? I guess you've become close. I can tell by the way you call him so affectionately. I guess that's right. You care so much for the man who knocked you off the throne you once held so dear. As expected, you are a saint. Rumble. Foolish chaos's words were swallowed by the thunder. The body of the foolish chaos, which had been caught in a flash of light, dissipated like steam. A single flick of Zeus's finger. With that single flick, the imperfect avatar found it difficult to maintain its form any longer. Stop talking nonsense. Tell me what you're going to do. Of course, since we want the same thing. Are you agreeing? Yes. He received a definitive answer. If so, there was nothing more to be done. Swoosh. Zeus's finger flicked once more. Boom. The body of the foolish chaos was covered in a golden aura. If you're done talking, shut your dirty mouth and get out. You act like him. Keep your promise. Of course. Swoosh. Since there was no more to talk about, the foolish chaos had no reason to maintain his avatar any longer. Is there any doubt? And so the foolish chaos disappeared without a trace. After that, I was trying to get some rest, but there are so many annoying people. There was no point in going up to the clouds, as a new guest had arrived. Thanks to you, I had a hard time finding you. Clack. Yu-won stepped onto the cloud and rose up. Zeus checked the bottom of Yu-won's feet to see how he was standing on the clouds like himself. The clouds were frozen white. Thanks to that, not only Yuan, but also Heracles, who had come with him, were able to float on the clouds like him. You came looking for me? Yeah, why? If you wanted to say hello, you should have done it earlier, not now. We're not that close. Say hello to each other. Yuan said so and looked back at Heracles. Heracles frowned and shook his head slightly, as if asking why he was saying such useless things. As Yuan and Heracles made eye contact, that guy came by. Zeus got straight to the point. No matter how close they were, Zeus had no intention of exchanging pleasantries with Yuan. He might have been a reliable comrade to fight with, but he was not yet a close friend. Just the simple business. That's what Yuan wanted too. What did he say? Your guy said the same thing. Then you too. Yuan's eyes narrowed. He didn't know how many times the Zeus in front of him was being re-evaluated. How many minds had gathered to plan this? Even his colleagues had thought about it for a long time before coming up with the idea. Moreover, he didn't know how many people had thought about it together before reviewing the plan and deciding to carry it out. On the other hand, Zeus was alone. He had succeeded in coming up with a plan all by himself. However, I had the same idea, but the timing is a little different. I was thinking much further into the future. As he said that, Yuan looked at the spot where the foolish chaos had just disappeared. But I guess that wasn't it. The deal with the foolish chaos was made because they had the same purpose. However, there was no agreement on the process. The schedule was suddenly brought forward. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Is it because of me? Eugene shrugged. It's not exactly that. Even if it wasn't you, that guy would have moved on his own. With the same plan, the foolish chaos met Eugene and Zeus separately. He seemed to know what their intentions were. However, you must have intended to confuse me about when to start. A time difference in the disruption of information. And through that, the damage would be amplified. The foolish chaos intended to make Eugene and Zeus prepare when they knew the time, but to make them clash with each other. You failed. Yes. Then what do we do? Should I delay the timing as you wish? Eugene shook his head at Zeus's question. The future seen in the vision. He didn't think he could change that future with such a superficial method right now. If I can't change the future right now. Eugene had one determination. Let's go as planned. If it can't be avoided, then face it head on. It was the right thing to do, and Eugene had always survived this way. Will it be okay? Of course, I need to prepare to reduce the damage on my side. Having said that, Eugene looked at Zeus with his eyes narrowed. Unlike himself, who was thinking about the future, Zeus intended to settle the score tomorrow. That means, you must have prepared something too, right? It meant that Zeus had prepared another method. As expected. I do. Zeus answered Eugene's words without hesitation. He was curious. What method did Zeus, who was trying to move before him, have in mind? And to Eugene's question, this guy, Zeus pointed to Hercules, who was standing absent-mindedly to one side. Then, this guy, Eugene made an expression of disbelief. There was no explanation, as if to just let him know. Zeus nodded and turned away. Take care of your guy for now. Half of his face is rotten. Perhaps because he had used the vision too much, Eugene's face was much paler than usual. I wondered if he would be able to fight properly tomorrow because he was so tired. I had something a little tiring to do. Are you okay? I'll be fine after a day's sleep. It's just that my mana is depleted. If that's the case, Zeus's concern was limited to that. His body slowly descended beneath the clouds. Now that his task was done, there was no reason for him to stay here any longer. Well then, let's see each other at Concord tomorrow. Yes. Swish. Eugene watched Zeus, who was slowly disappearing beneath the clouds, and nodded. Tomorrow, at Concord. Me. As always, the sound of goats crying could be heard in the forest. Those who entered without permission would go deaf and crazy just from hearing the sound. Nevertheless, the foolish chaos ignored the gazes of the goats and walked on. Goo. In the dark forest that even devoured light. In it, two purple eyes floated, emitting light. A giant goat raised its head. You plan to visit here again. The giant goat, which appeared without even a sound, slowly blinked its eyes, looking down at the foolish chaos. Didn't you listen to my warning? The foolish chaos clasped his hands together and greeted Shub-Niggurath politely at his threat. He was the king of this forest. Shub-Niggurath was an absolute being everywhere else, but even more so in this forest. Don't be so wary. Am I speaking to you? Me. Meh. As if it was funny, other goats bleated instead of Shub-Niggurath. At the blatant mockery, the foolish chaos smiled faintly inside his robe. Didn't you say it, pointing his finger at his face. The foolish chaos uttered words that pierced Shub-Niggurath's heart. Since I got this name. Shub-Niggurath fell silent. In that silence, the foolish chaos felt more anger than any other words. Did I say something unnecessary? Shub-Niggurath raised his head and wailed towards the purple sky. Ma, goo 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 goo. His body felt like it was going to be crushed. The foolish chaos barely managed to stand without bending his knees. As expected, it was Shub-Niggurath, and as expected, it was the Black Forest. In this place, the world changes with just one of his wails. Why did you come to me to say such things? I have a favor to ask. A favor? You, to me? Yes. In return, when the work is definitely finished, I will give you whatever you want. It was an extraordinary proposal. Upon hearing that, only one thought came to Shub-Niggurath's mind. You must know what I want, don't you? Yes, I know. The foolish chaos nodded towards Shub-Niggurath. For now, it was time to bow his head. I will give you this name. Name. Shub-Niggurath's voice trembled slightly. Me. As if to match that, the goats of the Black Forest wailed. The goats were another aspect of Shub-Niggurath. Through their wails, the foolish chaos could tell how passionately he was changing. And just now, the foolish chaos's proposal. All right. It was a proposal that even Shub-Niggurath could never refuse. I will accompany you for a while. Chapter 425. The Valkyries were summoned. It was an order to summon not only an army of thousands consisting entirely of rankers, but also their leader, Brunhilde. The warriors of Valhalla were all armed with spears and swords, ready to fight at any time. What's going on, Vice Captain? Have you heard anything? Nothing has been communicated yet. They just told us to arm ourselves and stand by. Vice Captain Zigland couldn't understand what was going on. The order she received was simply to prepare for battle and put the Valkyries on standby. Today is supposed to be a day of reconciliation. A meeting of the leaders of the large guilds, or the top high rankers within the top 100 of the rankings, to establish alliances and make discussions and promises for the future. Furthermore, the day of reconciliation was scheduled to continue for 3 days starting today. The discussions on the subject of the outside of the tower were that important. However, what is there to fight about on a day like today? Thud, that was when the leader of the Valkyries arrived at the training ground. Everyone was already curious. Zigland saluted Brunhilde, who had just shown up. You've arrived. You seem to be ready. Yes, but why were we given this order? Zigland nodded her head. It was a very reasonable question. However, the one who could answer that question was not Brunhilde. It is His Majesty's order. His Majesty's. I have not been told the reason. She did not know the reason. Despite that, Brunhilde's expression did not hold a single question. Even so, it is an order given by His Majesty. Yes. Zigland also agreed with those words. It was none other than Odin. The great being who had established Valhalla in this world teeming with monsters, when there was not even a proper country, and had raised the Valkyries. She believed that there was nothing as foolish as questioning the actions of such an Odin. Brunhilde made the Valkyries understand that. Even so. She looked at the Valkyries who had finished arming themselves and were waiting for the next order. I hope that His Majesty is wrong about this one. She was anxious, even though she knew it was unlikely. When was the last time so many Valkyries had been mobilized? Perhaps it was the first time since Ragnarok. But now, at this moment when Valhalla, the strongest force in the tower, had gathered. Keeping the Valkyries armed and on standby meant one thing. A battle greater than Ragnarok awaits us. Creak. The gates of Valhalla Castle opened. Mimir, who had entered Odin's room, spoke to Odin, who was watering a tree inside. You're here again. Splash, splash. Like a gardener, Odin was watering the trees that grew in rows inside the room, even though there was no sunlight. Why do you always come to this disgusting place? You're probably the only one in this tower who finds Yggdrasil disgusting. Of course, because of this damn tree, I've been living in a deep sleep for years. Yggdrasil. In Asgard, it was known as the Tree of Life and the source of all magical power. However, to Mimir, Yggdrasil was like a nemesis that he couldn't even burn to death, who had put him into a long sleep. But Odin had moved Yggdrasil to his room and was growing it with care, so he couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Don't be so mean. It was Yggdrasil who cursed you, but it is also Yggdrasil who can lift your curse. That was true. Mimir knew that too. The only way to lift this terrible curse was Yggdrasil. But what's going on since this morning? Didn't you order it? The Valkyries. Yes, they're ready. As expected of Brunhild, she's always one step ahead of what I expect. Odin, who had been tending to Yggdrasil with a crooked back, let out a chuckle. How long had he been here? Mimir asked, thinking of Odin, who hadn't been seen since last night. Have you been here all this time? Well, where else would I go? Without sleeping. You haven't slept either. Don't worry, it won't be a problem if you don't sleep for a day. Mimir lived 99 years out of 100 asleep. Because of that, Mimir never slept as much as he was awake. Anyway, he would soon get plenty of sleep, so he would enjoy being awake now. But, you seem very tense. Mimir and Odin were different. Odin had never intentionally stayed awake like this before. As Odin said, staying up all night would not cause any major problems, but he considered regularity to be quite important. He understood, thinking about what had happened not long ago. I didn't feel this way even when I fought Surtur. Look. Odin, who had been watering the roots of Yggdrasil, took off the straw hat he was wearing on his head and asked. Is it really today? It was a question he had heard several times already. Yes, today will be remembered by another name, not as the Day of Unity. It can't be helped, there is no better day than today to unite those wayward guys. Indeed, it was a statement he could not help but agree with. Just look at the rankers he had met yesterday. Rankers are those who have proven their abilities by conquering the tower to the top. The probability of being selected as a player and becoming a ranker was only a few 10,000ths, so each and every one of them was like a chosen being. Furthermore, high rankers were those who competed for the top ranks among such rankers. Even that Diablo guy will not be easy to control. The tower was divided into several factions, under the name of guilds, and into worlds divided into different floors. Uniting such divided forces was the true purpose of today's unity. Is there anyone else who knows about this? 2 more. 2, he thought there might be, but 2. Mimir nodded at Odin's questioning expression and answered. Kim Yu-1 and Zeus. At least these 2 will know. Even if Yu-1 is, Zeus too. 1 seemed likely. Yu-1 was a being who had returned after being chosen by the clockwork. Moreover, through Mimir's knowledge, he had already made plans for what would happen in the future. However, Zeus was unexpected. It was good to let him go. Perhaps Zeus, like Yu-1, could be a necessary comrade in the fight against the beings outside the tower. Odin had such expectations, but, don't trust him too much. Mimir's thoughts were quite different from Odin's. Even if Kim Yu-1 is not here, that Zeus guy is a bit dangerous. Dangerous. His goals may be the same, but his means and methods are different. He's a guy who doesn't hesitate to give up or sacrifice something for his own purpose. Why do you think so? Because that's how Olympus was built. At Mimir's words, Odin recalled the past history of Olympus. A guild founded with the 3 gods, including Zeus. Zeus became the king and reigned over the guild. As the king of Asgard, he had watched the process of Olympus being built from afar, but it was definitely not a smooth process. Indeed, let's keep an eye on him. Well, anyway, he's definitely the most reliable ally we have right now. What do you want me to do? Grumbling at the complicated words, Odin changed his clothes. He took off his straw hat and changed his clothes, but he still exuded dignity. Mimir followed Odin, whose expression had changed, down the corridor. It was time. Has the great heavenly king not arrived yet? I've asked around, but he's nowhere to be found. That's a shame. He would have been a great help. There's no doubt about his skills. I think he'll be the strongest being in this tower in the future. The strongest, even stronger than me, probably. He's looking for Cheonchuk right now. Cheonchuk. The 2 of them saw a door. The meeting room for today's reconciliation. In there, many great rankers from numerous large guilds would be gathered. We can find him with the Horse King. Probably. Then let's leave him alone. Clack. Odin grabbed the handle to open the meeting room. Let's do our job. Kriak. The door to the meeting room opened wide. It was just one door, less than an inch thick. But as soon as Odin opened the door and stepped inside, he felt the air touching his skin change. Dozens of rankers filled the meeting room. Standing in front of them, Odin opened his mouth. It's been a day. There was no pretense. If there was, he had done enough yesterday. You all know why you're here, don't you? There was no answer. However, all of them knew. This place was a place to prepare for the beings outside the tower. Agni of Deva, Kubera. Odin's gaze swept over the crowd. He looked for the rankers who had fought with Shub-Niggurath on the first floor. Zeus, Agni of Deva, Kubera. And even Zeus, all those who knew about Shub-Niggurath, as they had been invited to this place, were gathered here. They would be the ones to testify about the beings outside the tower in this place. In addition to that, Kim Yu-1 is, Yu-won probably knows more than any of us. But, knock, knock, Mimir poked Odin's back with his finger. He knew. He was also watching, since he had eyes. He's not here. There was someone who should have been here. Kim Yu-won. Why? At the same time, a town at the end of the world, where a black wall soared high into the sky. Swish. The farmers who were weeding glanced at the wall they had been watching more often than usual today. Is today the day? They say they're holding the Assembly of Harmony in the capital. Really? Is that why some monster came from outside? That's why they're meeting. How can we live with this ominous feeling? We should move soon. They straightened their bent backs and began to chat. The farmers, who had left the field and sat down in their places, began to prepare a new meal. Well, that's something for the great players to figure out. All we have to do is eat and live. Right? Yeah, Odin will take care of it. But I can't help but feel uneasy. After the wall collapsed and the beings outside the tower first appeared, inhabitants of villages that were connected to the wall in various worlds began to move in large numbers. There was one reason. It was because they no longer believed that the town they lived in was safe. Didn't they say that's why they met today? An answer will come out in a few days anyway. Right, don't worry about it too much, and let's have a drink first. Crack, a sound came from somewhere. It wasn't very loud, but the sound pierced everyone's ears very clearly. Crack, the heads of the inhabitants gathered in the village turned. As if by agreement, they turned in the same direction. And so, in their eyes, they saw the wall that had begun to crack again. Chapter 426. Valhalla Castle was in sight. It seemed like they would arrive if they just walked a few more steps. However, Vishnu couldn't do it. It was because of the uninvited guest blocking his way. What is it? I just have something to say. It was Kim Yu-won, whom he had met yesterday. Looking at him, Vishnu sighed and shook his head. It doesn't mean that what's going to happen won't happen just because of this. I know, you can't overturn destiny. That was something Vishnu always said like a catchphrase. It was impossible to change a destiny that had already been set. The only way to change a destiny that had been decided for the future was to change what had already happened, the past. That was why he said that the only way to change the future was with the clockwork. Yu-won had heard similar things from him more than 10 times. But you don't know everything, do you? What do you mean? Even if it's something that's going to happen anyway, it doesn't mean that we can just let it happen, right? Creak. Yu-won's eyes turned gold. Vishnu's eyes widened as he met his gaze. The moment their eyes met, he realized that Yu-won had seen the same thing as him. Let's try our best to steer it towards a good direction. You also saw it. Precognition. Eyes with a transcendental power that allowed them to see the future by entering a different timeline than others. If they had those eyes, it was possible to see destiny like Vishnu. No, perhaps it was possible to see it much more clearly. Then you should know even better. That there is no other way. Yu-won didn't answer. Vishnu sighed in frustration and looked up at the sky. A calamity is coming. The sky was still blue. But that might only last until today. To stop that, is there no other way? Clack. Yu-won's head turned. He's here, small in stature, barely reaching his waist. A young child with a lollipop in his mouth walked behind Yu-won. Another way. This guy, the one you were talking about. The child's appearance didn't match his old man-like speech. Now that all of the last guests he had been waiting for had gathered, Yu-won finally said what he had been saving. You three shouldn't be together. You sound as weird as I've heard. Click, click. Brahma approached Yu-won. He was a cute little child, but he was a being who was harder to read than Vishnu or Shiva. Why are you stopping us? Weren't you three originally one? Brahma's eyes narrowed. He didn't seem surprised. From the moment he heard Yu-won's words, he had expected something like this. Swoosh. Yu-won took out the player kit that he had in his arms. Countless names and numbers floated on the kit screen. It was the rankings of each ranker managed by the Rank Management Bureau. First place. Second place, Odin. Third place, Vishnu. Fourth place, Zeus. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. From first to 100th place. The names and rankings of the rankers were displayed. And among them, Yu-won enlarged one ranking and pointed at it with his finger. Here, this. First place. It was a ranking that had never changed once in the long history of the tower. The unshakable first place, which even Asgard's great kings couldn't surpass. That's you guys. They were Diva's three main gods. 1 and 3, 3 and 1. It's an old and forgotten story that only the Bureau and the administrators know. There are two more who know. At Brahma's words, Yu-won looked at him. Brahma answered Yuan's expression, asking who they were. Odin and Mimir. Really? To think that those two knew about Diva's old myth. I don't know about everything. It wasn't an important story anyway. Anyway, the important story was about the three people including Vishnu. Did Odin say that? As Brahma saw it, it was understandable enough to be misunderstood that way. Only Odin and Mimir knew the story about them. And Yuan and Odin had had quite a few interactions. However, we shouldn't have met again. The one who told Yuan this story was none other than Vishnu himself. It doesn't matter how I found out. No, it's important to us. What's important right now is who takes the lead. Brahma's one eye twitched at Yuan's words. The lead? How long has it been since the one split into three? What? A sudden response, as if asking why he was asking that. Soon after, he put on a contemplating expression, as if trying to gauge the long time. Then, it's been a little over 10,000 years. Vishnu, who finished his thoughts first, answered. 10,000 years. It was a long time that was hard to estimate even for rankers who had no restrictions on their lifespan. It must have been around the time Diva was founded. It's been a long time. But what does that have to do with? What do you think Shiva has been doing for thousands of years? Vishnu and Brahma couldn't answer Yuan's question. Of course. How much do you know about each other? They didn't know anything about each other. Odin, who arrived at the conference room, remained silent for a while. While looking for Yuan, he had also found other faces who were absent. Neither Vishnu nor Brahma is here. Odin's eyes glanced over Shiva, who was sitting in one corner. Shiva, who had his arms crossed and was moving his fingers as if something was not to his liking. It seemed like he was waiting for the other two as well. I suppose, it wasn't an incomprehensible situation. He knew what would happen if the three of them gathered in one place. Still, he thought that at least two of the three would show up since the place was the place it was. Why are you thinking for so long? The seat closest to the head seat. Odin nodded at Zeus's urging to start soon. My apologies. I kept you waiting. It's natural for the main character to appear the latest. Apologies are unnecessary. Zeus responded to Odin's words with the familiarity of an old friend. It wasn't the first time they had talked face to face. Odin and Zeus had met each other several times as the heads of giant guilds representing the tower. But still, Odin had never once been wary of or distant towards him during those meetings. It was because he didn't see him as someone on the same level as him in the first place. He's changed a lot. Now, he was more than qualified to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. No, if what Mimir said was true, he might even be looking at a higher place than himself now. Then, let's talk about why we're all gathered here. The start of the real story. After Odin's declaration, there was someone who opened their mouth as if they had been waiting. We should attack first. A man with a fierce expression who had been sitting with his arms crossed on one side. Asura, he glared with his eyes full of fighting spirit. Then, that guy, is his bloodlust a passive skill or something? Every time I see him, all he does is talk about fighting. That's right. Does he think this is some martial arts world he used to live in? Even the leader of that martial arts world is quiet right now. True, Asura's rank is much higher though. People murmured at Asura's words. It might have been different in another place, but this was a place where giant guilds came together. High rankers within the top 100, like Asura, gathered here. Even he, who had received an invitation and came to find a place to fight, could not be the only one to fight here. Furthermore, impossible. Ashura's opinion was something that could not be accepted in the first place. With your skills, it's impossible. With my skills. Ashura's eyebrows twitched at Zeus' words. Unveiled murderous intent. At that gaze and murderous intent, Zeus clicked his tongue as if he felt sorry for him and shook his head. Diablo or you, those who are crazy about fighting. Once you fall from the throne and come back up, you think the world is yours. SS is. One of Ashura's heads emerged. A word referring to him who entered the tower a long time ago. 3 heads and 6 arms. One of those heads had emerged. Now you're struggling with only 2 heads left. Shut up and come outside. I'll give you a good fight later. Not later. Don't you know anything about that guy? At Zeus' words, Ashura, who was about to get up from his seat, sat down again. An interesting story came out, and he confirmed that Zeus had no intention of fighting here right now. In the first place, Ashura didn't like to fight an opponent who didn't want to fight. Then tell me, what kind of guy was he? Most of the rankers here had not seen Shub-Niggurath in person. Most of them had only seen pictures taken by someone through the kit and heard that such a thing had happened. Nevertheless, the reason they were able to be vigilant was because even Odin, who was right in front of them, could not stop the being from outside the tower. There's no need to try so hard to find out. The one who cut off the nerve war between Zeus and Ashura was Odin. You'll meet him soon anyway. Quote? As if to ask what that meant. Everyone's gaze was drawn to Odin. Odin was looking at Zeus. Their eyes met, and at that moment, Zeus realized that Odin was thinking the same thing as he was. As expected, first of all, I apologize to everyone. Swoosh. Odin bowed his head. Most of them were surprised. As the king of Asgard, known as the greatest ranker in history, he bowed his head in front of so many people. Odin, who raised his head again like that, brought out the story he had been hiding inside. This place is not a place for reconciliation today. Rumble, rumble, clatter, clatter. Just then, the ceiling of Valhalla Castle shook, and pens and other things placed on the round table of the conference room rolled and fell down. Today, I have prepared this place to fight with everyone. To fight, who with? There were those whose eyes sparkled. Ashura and Cheon Mu Jin of the Murim world. Including them, the high rankers who were thirsty for the fight itself. For them, who were not very interested in boring reconciliation, Odin's words were very interesting. I've been thinking about it ever since I fought it. The great heavenly king, Zeus, and even thousands of rankers. It was all we could do to drive it back outside. Ma-ah, very far away, a cry was heard from the end of the world. Bam! At that cry, Odin's fist clenched by itself. Asgard alone is not enough. It's not enough, but with everyone here, I think it's worth a try. Shub-Niggurath, a god outside the tower who commands numerous goats. In order to defeat it, we had no choice but to borrow the power of the rankers outside Asgard. I deceived everyone. Chapter 427. Brahma's eyes widened at the unexpected story. The entire village floated upwards. The residents who were living there had bewildered expressions on their faces, unable to comprehend the situation, or their faces were full of fear. What's going on? Oh my God, the village. The village, including the ground, was lifted up and moved. Beyond the mountain, a wall appeared in their sight, cracking and crumbling. It hadn't completely collapsed yet. Thud. Thud. At the faint cries coming from within, the residents lost consciousness one by one and collapsed on the spot. Oh no, and before they knew it, Mimir, who had squeezed in between them, turned his head in the direction of the crack. I need to block out the sound first. Hum. A magic circle was drawn from the tip of Mimir's hand. Odin, who was known as the best magician of the tower. However, it was Mimir who had originally taught Odin the technique of magic when Odin was fighting like a savage with a spear. Now, he had fallen under the curse of knowledge and his ranking had dropped significantly, but Mimir was once a ranker who had risen through the tower shoulder to shoulder with Odin. Blocking out sound was nothing to him. What's going on? Hey, you, wake up, is the world ending or something? The unconscious residents foamed at the mouth. Only about half of them were still conscious. Fortunately, there was no major problem thanks to the sound being blocked out. Mimir felt even more uncomfortable about that fact. He's shaking their minds with just sound, without any special transfer of magical power. He had received the curse of knowledge and learned everything about this tower. Mimir prided himself on knowing everything about this tower. And based on that knowledge, he knew that all the laws of the tower were determined by magical power, magi, and points. The law that every result requires a cause and a corresponding price in power. That's why it was even more so. Was this really possible? Mimir couldn't understand what was happening now. The crack that was slowly starting to open. The outside world was literally an incomprehensible realm, even to him who had received the curse of knowledge. A familiar cry was heard. Vishnu raised his head. Before he knew it, the color of the sky was changing. Behind him, Brahma mumbled as he dropped the candy he had in his mouth. So that's what I've only heard about. There had already been a few times when a purple sky like this had been observed on the tower. But the most well-known one was just a little while ago. It was when Shub-Niggurath appeared on the first floor. It's also the fate that I saw. At Vishnu's words, Yuan nodded his head. He had already known, but the fate that Vishnu had seen was this after all. Shub-Niggurath, a huge disaster that they couldn't stop with their current power. That bastard was the reason why Vishnu wanted to become one with Brahma and Shiva again. That damn bastard. Inwardly, he gnashed his teeth at the foolish chaos that had caused this. Why now of all times? And how now of all times? As the two thoughts crossed his mind, his mouth moved before his head could. We have to stop it. It was such an obvious thing to say. Do you think we're here because we don't know that? At Brahma's curt question, Yuan shook his head. No. Then stop talking nonsense and get out of the way. Didn't you hear what I just said? Oh, so what are you going to do about it? Brahma, who was getting irritated, looked at Vishnu behind Yuan. Hey, didn't you see anything about what this guy said? I don't see it. That damn fate, it's not helping at a time like this. The fate that I saw ends here. Vishnu shook his head. He looked up at the sky that had turned purple and continued speaking. Under that sky, all fates disappear. What? Fate doesn't work. Brahma's eyes widened at the unexpected story. Has that ever happened before? No. Ha, damn, was it because he had heard Vishnu's words that the sky looked different, even though it was the same sky? Is the real world really going to end? He had muttered the words without thinking, but they came to Yuan all too realistically. That's right. If things continued like this, the world would end. And it would be very chaotic. You also know quite a bit about that guy, don't you? You said you saw him in person. I did. Actually, we don't know much about each other. We don't even know what Shiva has been doing for thousands of years. Vishnu and Brahma were different from Shiva. It was Vishnu who had founded Deva and worked to maintain the order and balance of the tower, but it was actually Shiva who had held the real power in Deva. All I've done is sleep, and that guy has wasted his time fishing and watching over fate. But, we don't know much about each other, that's for sure, but even so, there is no other way than this. Vishnu continued Brahma's words. Swish. Before he knew it, Brahma had brushed past Yuan. As if he had nothing more to say. You go and do your thing. We'll take care of the three of us. Clank, clank, the two of them walked towards the castle together. Yuan watched Vishnu and Brahma's backs like that. Where the two of them had passed. Whoosh, wasn't it a failure? Susanoo, the shadow that had risen from below Yuan, asked. In the end, Yuan had failed to persuade Vishnu and Brahma. If things continued like this, it was inevitable that the three of them would meet again. However, no, it's a success. Yuan looked at the two people walking away and replied to Susanoo. Because I planted doubt, and I did it to 2 out of 3. From the beginning, Yuan knew that he couldn't stop the two of them with his persuasion. Vishnu and Brahma had foreseen this moment for a long time. Vishnu, in particular, had thought that if an unstoppable disaster struck the tower, the three of them would have to become one again, even from over 10,000 years ago. It was a decision that had been made after thousands of years of contemplation, stretching back over 10,000 years. No matter how great the rhetoric, there was no way to stop it. That's why Yuan had changed his mind to planting the seeds of doubt in their hearts. Then what are you going to do now? I don't know what you're thinking, but it doesn't seem like those guys are wrong. Shub Niggurath, a disaster that even Odin, Son Goku, and Zeus could not handle. Do you have any other ideas? It's not like I don't have any insurance. That's true, but, okay, for now, let's do what those guys said we should do. Swish, Yuan handed Susanoo a sword. An item with a blade redder than blood. In addition to that, Yuan handed Susanoo both the Yata mirror and the 8 Shaku Kyokugyoku. I'll go my way, and you guys go yours. I understand. As you command. Susanoo, followed by Arthur, and then Ares. 3. That was the number of summons that Yuan could use without any burden at the moment. Yuan nodded and looked far away, to where the purple sky began. The world where Shub Niggurath had descended. It seemed a little early, but it might have been better that way. Is it finally starting? An outer god, one of the greatest gods among them. It's a little disappointing that Son Goku isn't here. For this day, Yuan had sharpened his sword. But I've got all the pieces of the puzzle in place. A small town leading to Valhalla. Numerous soldiers lined up in front of the city's castle gate. What's going on? The sky. Has anyone ever seen anything like this? Asgard's army, composed of a small number of rankers and a large number of players, numbering in the thousands, trembled at the sound of crying coming from afar. Ma, thud, swish, some collapsed powerlessly, while others barely managed to hold on to the railing before losing consciousness. The rankers who managed to withstand the crying sound helped the collapsing soldiers. Pull yourself together. What the hell is going on? Is it because of that crying sound? There were no other signs than the sound of crying. The enemy was not visible, and no magical power was detected. In fact, the artillery installed outside the castle was still inactive, indicating that no enemy had been detected. But then, a clear cry came from somewhere. It was different from the crying sound they had heard before. It didn't provoke a sense of primal fear, but rather felt like it was touching their skin. However, just because it felt different didn't mean that the two were completely different. The moment they heard the crying sound, the soldiers all felt that it was ultimately one and the same. There was only one reason why they felt this way. The crying sound was much closer. Me. Suddenly, a kid goat appeared among the soldiers. A small kid goat that looked like a child. The moment he saw the kid goat, the eyes of the soldier closest to it turned bloodshot. Hawk. The soldier collapsed, vomiting blood from his mouth. All it took was meeting the kid goat's eyes from up close. And at that moment, all those who are not rankers, fall back. The ranker commanding them shouted, blocking the soldiers' path. They realized at the moment they saw it. Only those with the strength of a ranker or higher could deal with that kid goat. Ordinary soldiers would only get in the way. The kid goat approached slowly. When did it climb the high castle wall, and how could such a small creature exude such a powerful presence? Glance. A ranker at the level of a centurion. Holt gripped the spear in his hand tightly and signaled with his eyes. Move together when I give the signal. The rankers on the castle wall nodded at the signal. 1, 2, and 3, quing. The spear in Holt's hand pierced through the kid goat's throat, scattering the wind. At the same time, dozens of spears, swords, and arrows were fired at the kid goat as if to block its escape. Kwaat, ku gu gung. Dust rose over the castle wall, and the part of the wall where the kid goat had been standing collapsed completely. It was quite an impact, but it didn't feel like it pierced properly. Quack. Holt, who had thrown his spear with all his might, clenched his hands as if he were nervous. Then the dust settled. The kid goat reappeared with only a few wounds on its body. Is that all it can do? Where the hell did this monster come from? They were convinced that it would be a difficult fight. But that only lasted for a moment. Well, that's a relief. Holt consoled himself that the opponent wasn't that great compared to the creepy feeling he had felt from the crying sound. Compared to the anxiety I felt at first, this is creepy. A chill ran down his spine, and his body stiffened. Holt wasn't the only one. All the rankers who had moved with him were the same. What? Crazy. Before they knew it, the surrounding soldiers had lost consciousness and collapsed, or were laughing with vacant expressions as if they had lost their minds. Around the castle wall where they stood. Hundreds of goats were crying as they tore into the corpses of the soldiers. Chapter 428. The world instantly turned into a chaotic battlefield. Block it. Block what? Just run away. Hey, where are the Valkyries? Suddenly, goats swarmed the world. Of course, they were just small goats on the surface, but they were monsters that even intermediate rankers couldn't handle. This isn't something we can handle. Og, save me. Thud, the goats went on a rampage. Rankers, heads and legs were torn off as they failed to handle a single goat, and a river of blood flowed beneath the collapsed wall. We're doomed. The administrator of the wall tightly shut his eyes. The goat that came right up to his nose opened its mouth. His body froze, unable to move, and he thought that this was the end. But at that moment, clang, a spear that flew out of nowhere pierced the goat's body. Wow, they're here, it's the Valkyries. The Valkyries appeared in the sky, riding on white horses. The administrator of the wall, who had been smiling in relief, soon had a puzzled expression. How did they get here so quickly? It had only been 30 minutes since the incident had occurred. No matter how fast the Valkyries, heavenly horses were, it would take time for such a number of Valkyries to prepare and mobilize. That was why he had tried to defend the wall until the end, despite the urgent situation. The inner fortress must not be fully prepared yet. But this was as if. Were they prepared in advance? On this peaceful day of the Day of Harmony, it was as if they had anticipated a wartime situation. Questions arose, but they were temporary. Either way, he was alive thanks to them. He could rest easy for now since the Valkyries had arrived. Clang, Brunhild swung her sword and spear at the same time, cutting down the goats. She was the most dazzling among the numerous Valkyries. But that was only for a moment. What the heck, these guys? Brunhild looked at the goats that were still moving and groaning with their throats cut. She felt a sense of dissonance. It feels like I'm fighting something that's not alive. The goats in front of her were clearly small. They weren't very strong, nor were they particularly energetic. They sometimes opened their mouths grotesquely large to threaten her, but they weren't a threat to even high rankers. However, the more she fought them, the more she felt as if she was getting weaker. Am I getting discouraged? Swish. She gripped her sword tightly. Her pride was hurt. Screech. Her sword began to shine brightly. Light radiated from Brunhild's eyes. Radiance is activated. Brunhild's skill that cut down everything in front of her. The Valkyries who noticed it turned around. Everyone, fall back. The leader is making her move. Brunhild's sword doesn't distinguish between friend or foe. That's why the Valkyries moved as far away from Brunhild as possible the moment she used her power. Boom. The surroundings were dyed in a yellow light. Clang, clang. Brunhild's magic devoured the goats. In an instant, the purple sky lit up brightly. Brunhild, who had created that magnificent scene, raised the sword in her hand high and shouted. For Asgard. 4. War Cry is activated. The abilities of players belonging to Valkyrie will increase. The negative buffs on players belonging to Valkyrie will be dispelled. Players belonging to Valkyrie. Numerous effects were applied to the Valkyries. Even a single buff showed its effect. War Cry was a skill that made Brunhild the leader of the Valkyries. Brunhild's ranking was 182nd, lower than Yuan's. However, when she fought with the Valkyries, she exerted power and influence that was not inferior to that of a high ranker in the double digits. The morale of the Valkyries rose. Of course, Brunhild was against it. Was it too much? In an instant, Brunhild, who had poured out half of her magical power, had sweat dripping from her forehead. She regretted it for a moment. At this time, when it was unknown how long the battle would last, she wondered if her move just now had been too much. However, she couldn't help it. Not only were the goats difficult to kill with ordinary attacks, but this one blow was also intended to shake off the fear of the unknown. She judged that in this battle, more than anything else, the morale of the Valkyries was the most important thing. But to this extent, a cry was heard from within the radiant halo. Creepy. Brunhild, who had briefly shaken off her fear, felt a chill down her spine once more. As the halo gradually faded, goats with distorted faces reappeared from within. The goats were not dead. Rather, they were grinning. Brunhild's radiance had failed to leave a fatal wound on them. I wondered why you had the Valkyries prepared from the beginning. They were far from enough to be Valkyries. The morale that had risen for a moment plummeted again. Thud. The goats approached her and opened their mouths. Quack. Brunhild gripped the sword and spear in her hands and made up her mind. This is where I die. She was prepared to die. I heard that the Valkyries of Asgard were so great. Swoosh. A shadow passed by Brunhild. It seems it was all just nonsense. Who? Brunhild's eyes narrowed as she tried to ask who it was. His face was pale and his lips were blue. Even among these goats, his expression was full of joy, and there was even a hint of madness in his eyes. An undead summoner dressed in blue robes and holding a red sword. Asgard had information on him. Susano. We're old acquaintances. Susano belonged to the three-eyed tribe, but he was free. He had visited many strong people, and Brunhild was one of them. He couldn't bring himself to kill Brunhild, the leader of the Valkyries, but of course, Susano had won their fight at that time. I heard you became Kim Yuan's summoner. Things happen. Then he must have sent you here as well. Odin must have sent you here. Brunhild nodded. That meant that Yuan and Odin had thought of the same thing at the same time. The goat's eyes turned to Susano. There was no time to chat. You better be careful, they're not easy to kill. Careful. Thud. The goat's mouth covered Susano. Kwajik. The goat's mouth swallowed Susano. Brunhild was surprised by what had happened in an instant and moved her hand again. No, she tried to move. Swaik. Puwaik. Before the goat's body was torn to pieces. You Valkyries shouldn't compare yourselves to someone like me. Thud, thud. Susano, who had come out of the goat's mouth while tearing it apart, arrogantly put the kusanagi on his shoulder. It's good if you don't die easily. I'll be able to enjoy the taste longer. Ewing. The Yasukani no Magatama hanging from the kusanagi emitted light. Susano held the Yata no Kagami in one hand and the kusanagi with the Yasukani no Magatama attached to it in the other. Brunhild had not seen when Susano had swung his sword just now. It was already cut before it was swallowed. Before he was devoured, he was already torn apart. Susanoo, the summoned beast of Yuan, appeared and cut down the goat as Brunhilde led the Valkyries into battle, but the goat was not affected by the radiance. At that moment of despair, Susanoo appeared and cut down the goat, and Brunhilde was amazed by his power. Susanoo was ranked 57th when he was alive, but now that he is undead, he has become even stronger. Susanoo rampaged through the battlefield at Yuan's command, using the Sam Shinki to defeat the goat. Meanwhile, Apollo and Artemis joined the battle in their sun chariot, but they could not leave without Zeus and Hercules. Halgan expressed his willingness to do anything, and Zeus looked at him with heavy eyes. I knew Susanoo's ranking when he was alive. 57th place. He was the highest ranking of the Samdhyas at the time. If he were alive, he might have been ranked several dozen levels higher by now. That's how much he excelled in swordsmanship, more than anyone else in this tower. But, rather, he became undead and became stronger. Even his basic physical abilities were like that. It was natural for the undead to become weaker. Since the summoner's mana that controls the undead is not infinite, it was inevitable that they would be weaker than when they were alive. But in this case, it was the opposite. That means that Kim Yu-won's ability is great. Yu-won's ranking is high. No one disagrees that Yu-won will be ranked in the single digits within a few years. However, even so, the power of Susanoo in front of him was incomprehensible. Moreover, in his hands were all three of the Sam Shinki that the Samdhyas had been hoping for. Swoosh! Susanoo raised the kusanagi and looked at the goats gathering from all sides. A wriggling sensation rising from the depths of his chest. It would have been fear for ordinary people, but it was different for Susanoo. Thank you, I'm going crazy. Before coming here, there was only one order Yu-won gave to Susanoo. Go wild, just make sure you distinguish between friend and foe. Go wild, and to your heart's content. He even gave me the Sam Shinki, and my mana is overflowing like this. Just like when I was alive. No, he sent me to the best battlefield, more powerful than he was then. Sigh. A smile came over his face. Thank you, master. Susanoo. He joined the battlefield. Apollo got on the sun chariot. Artemis, who climbed into the saddle of the heavenly horse to drive the chariot with him, turned her head and looked up at Valhalla Castle. Don't we have to hurry? Apollo nodded at Artemis's words. The battle will probably be going on by now. The Valkyries had already left, and so had the impatient ones like Diablo. Same goes for us. Even Apollo was impatient to be playing with the sun chariot like this in such a dire situation. But, I can't leave my father behind. Zeus hadn't arrived yet. That wasn't all. Hercules, one of Olympus' top forces, was also the same. They don't matter much compared to those two, but Hargan is just as absent. The three of them had moved to a different location. And that moment, the top of Valhalla Castle. What was supposed to happen happened. Quote. Hercules and Hargan stood side by side facing Zeus. The conversation they had the day before. That conversation really appeared before his eyes as if it were true. Is there no other way? Zeus nodded at Hercules. Question. At least not for me. Ha. Hercules sighed at Zeus' answer. It was Zeus' answer, not anyone else's. He was the one who had seen Shub-Niggurath appear on the first floor in person. If that's Zeus' judgment, it must be certain. What kind of guy is he anyway? Glance. Hercules sighed again, looking at the distant sky where the purple color was getting darker. The outer existence that had just been pushed out was showing its face again. If this continues, the 64th floor will be destroyed. However, it was difficult to make a decision right away. No matter how much, just as Hercules glanced at Hargan next to him. I'll do it. Hargan nodded and made a decision. And that moment, really, Zeus' eyes sank heavily. That moment had finally come. Hercules and Hargan. The two of them were reflected in Zeus' eyes. As the fruit finally ripening. Chapter 429. Everyone had left and disappeared from the conference room. One person was waiting for someone while sitting in a chair with his arms crossed. Creak. Someone walked through the wide open door. Shiva, who had been waiting for him while sitting in his seat with his eyes closed, raised his head and greeted Brahma. Are you here? Can't you see? You're a bit late. No, maybe very late. If it had gone according to the original plan, they should have become one again by now. However, they hadn't. Vishnu is. Swish. Shiva's gaze turned to the space behind Brahma. Originally, the two should have arrived together. However, that plan had gone awry. Brahma was alone. What happened? What happened? What? Brahma spoke vaguely and sat down across from Shiva. A young child sitting with his legs crossed. Shiva's gaze naturally lowered. The two of them. Now, only one more person needed to arrive. And that other person, Vishnu. He's not far away. He wasn't completely separated from them. He was watching them from a short distance away. Perhaps through the string connected to his fingertips, seeing the invisible was nothing to him, who could even see fate. As expected, things have gone a bit wrong. There was no need to panic. If he hadn't planned to become one again from the start, Brahma and Vishnu wouldn't have come here. Their decision hadn't changed yet. Why are you being cautious? Huh, what? You're not good at acting, Brahma. Shiva burst into laughter. Trust me, I don't know what you're being cautious about or worried about, but we were originally one. I don't disbelieve you. It's just, what? I have something urgent to do. Something urgent. Why, that thing, in the middle of this. Shiva's expression, which had been smiling as if he were joking, twisted slightly. An ominous current flowed through the air. Crack, as if to express Shiva's mood, a crack appeared on the wall. However, Brahma nonchalantly took out a candy that he had in his inventory. What's so urgent? We've waited 10,000 years, so can't we wait a few hours? Isn't that different from what we agreed on? Don't worry, we'll become one eventually. Shiva glared at Brahma. Perhaps it wasn't empty talk. He could tell that he was being sincere. However, it was natural to feel uneasy. Why do I feel this way? Thud. At that moment, one more person walked into the conference room. And the moment he saw him, there was one more. Shiva could see why the schedule had changed. Yes, there's you. Clack, clack, he sat on the main seat where Odin had been sitting and put his feet on the round table. Yu-One met Shiva's reddened eyes and waved his hand without avoiding them. Nice to meet you. What's with the awkward greeting? Originally, insincere greetings are awkward. You messed everything up. Why are you so disappointed? Sigh. Yu-One looked at Brahma, who was looking away, acting ignorant, as if he had expected this. We haven't even started yet. Skart. Kusanagi drew a red line and cut the goat's body. The goat was cut as smoothly as tofu. In that short amount of time, he swung his sword several times, and the goat was torn into thousands, tens of thousands of pieces. However, even in the midst of being torn apart, the goat's eyes were still intact, looking at Susanoo with greed. Is this not enough? Crack. Susanoo's hand, which was holding Kusanagi, tightened. Wung, the Yasukani no Magatama emitted light. The magical power surrounding Susanoo began to tremble violently. If he doesn't die even after being cut into tens of thousands of pieces, then I'll turn him into dust. Creak. The sound of the wind and the sound of the sword moving were mixed together. Susanoo raised Kusanagi high with one hand. He warned in a small voice so that only Brunhild, who was fighting with him, could hear. Avoid it if you can. Whining. The wind gathered at one point. Before the next word could be said, Brunhild shouted to the other Valkyries. Get away from here. Of course, I don't want to get caught up in it and die. Queet. Storm Saint. The wind that had gathered at the tip of Susanoo's sword split into hundreds of millions of blades and swept through the surroundings. Quaat. The goat's body literally scattered like dust. No matter how tenacious the goat's vitality was, it could not survive when it was cut so finely that it was invisible. Susanoo, his fifth goat, sweating profusely. That's 5. It was quite difficult to kill them one by one. If they were just tenacious with their vitality, they would be fine if they took them on slowly, but their teeth were so hard and menacing that they could even crack the mirror of Yada. There were still many goats left. In terms of numbers, among the rankers currently in the vicinity, the only one who could directly help Susanoo was Brunhilde. Was this what he was wary of? Susanoo had been moving with Yu-One for a long time. During that time, Yu-One seemed to be constantly preparing something, wondering what he was lacking. He kept thinking it was too much. At this rate, Yu-One seemed like he would become the best ranker in the tower within 100 years, and Yu-One moved to bring not only Olympus and Asgard, but also several large guilds that were at the core of the tower to his side. In addition to that, there were high rankers like the Demon King, Son Goku, and Asura. I just thought it was excessive perfectionism. After fighting them directly, I think I know why. If you were up against guys like this, no matter how strong you got, you would feel like you were lacking. Susanoo, Brunhilde's scream. Susanoo, who had been lost in his thoughts for a moment, came to his senses. But on the battlefield, even a moment's distraction can cost you your life. Thwack. Susanoo realized that he was already inside a giant mouth. Damn it. Wung. The mirror of Yada shone. It was too late to jump and dodge. Now, I had no choice but to borrow the power of the item. Just as the mirror of Yada was about to shine its light. Thud, thud. 2 hands and feet blocked the goat's mouth from closing. Whose is it? Before the thought was finished. Thwack. The goat's body flew backwards. The screams of the goats grew louder at the appearance of a new enemy. Diablo looked at Susanoo, dusting off his hands after blowing away the goat with his bare fists. What the hell? This little punk. That was what he said to the world's Susanoo. If it were the usual Susanoo, he would have drawn his sword right away. But now was not the time to worry about such things. He's probably not dead yet. What? Thud. Diablo turned around. A fist that was reflexively extended. And at the same time, the goat's teeth bit into Diablo's arm. Bam! PFF'd. The goat's teeth pierced Diablo's shoulder. It wasn't a deep wound, but Diablo's eyebrows furrowed in pain. What the hell? These things. I told you, he's probably not dead. Screech. The goat's head was cut off. Diablo hurriedly kicked the goat away with his foot and created some distance. Susano glanced at Susano and asked. So, who's the pushover now? They're not as easy as that. Diablo. He was the first to arrive as soon as he heard the news from the Hall of Harmony. It was natural since he loved fighting more than anyone else. And to him, the existence of the goats before him was. Clack, I'm going to finish them off. He approached with the utmost pleasure. Bang, Diablo kicked the ground and flew away. Susano watched Diablo fly into the goats and start swinging his fists, and he clicked his tongue with a wry smile. I've never seen anyone more savage than me. He, too, had lived crazy about fighting, blood, and swords. But it was the first time he had seen someone as purely crazy about fighting as Diablo before him. Is that how others saw him? Are you going to enjoy this alone? A huge shadow covered Susano's body. It was right after Diablo arrived. Goo. He looked up and saw countless ships in the sky. Are they Devas and Asgardians? The ships of Devas and Asgardians had arrived on the battlefield. The guilds representing this tower. In addition, the Demon King, the demons of the sky, and the angels gathered on the ground. The army swelled in an instant. The Valkyries who had been pushing back the goats stopped moving for a moment. Brunhilde, who had been breathing hard, also caught her breath for a moment. They're finally here. The tension from just a moment ago disappeared and was replaced by a sense of relief. An army of unprecedented size. And numerous rankers and high rankers mixed in among them. My heart pounded just looking at it. No matter how long I lived, I never thought I would see such a sight with my own eyes. The tension melted away like snow. Of course, no matter how great an existence, it makes no sense to say that you can't stop it. Let's finish this for now. But she had forgotten. The cry she had first heard was different from the cries of the goats around her. Ma, a cry that spread under the purple sky. Creepy. The tension that had been erased for a moment came back. No, it wasn't something that could be explained by mere tension. Fear and frustration, and a sense of despair that surpassed it. What the hell? This overwhelming fear, even with these huge guilds and high rankers as allies. Brunhild turned her head to find the source of the cry. At the same time, the battlefield became as quiet as if it had frozen. And in the meantime, one of the goats turned around, crying. Me. The goats cried out in one direction. The armies of Asgard and Diva, as well as Diablo, who had been rioting, stopped as they watched the goats start to move slowly. Glup. Even Diablo didn't realize it. The fact that he was swallowing hard with fear. Zeke. One of the goats was split open. It was the largest goat in the herd. It seemed that the cub it was carrying in its belly was killing its own mother and coming out. Thus, a human with two horns slowly came out into the world, splitting open the goat's belly. That has it been there all along? Susano shook his head at Diablo's question. No way. A slender body over 2 meters long. Black and purple eyes without white sclera and skin so pale it was white. She was a beautiful woman. The goats cried as if following her like a mother. And looking at her, if that were the case, everyone would have been annihilated by now. Because he realized that she was the owner of the cry he had heard just now. For the first time in his life, Susano felt despair. Chapter 430. The mother came out of the child's stomach. The woman who appeared in the world in reverse order raised her head. The sky turned purple. This world was the same. You've finally come. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, a cool air that she had never smelled before filled her lungs. This is great, the air of the living world. She had only smelled it once before. Before she could even set foot in this world properly, she was chased out by them and banished outside again. Even now, she gets irritated when she thinks about her memories of that time. But she could bear it for now. Sook. The woman turned her head. Where her gaze landed, Agni and Kubera were standing with their bodies frozen. Long time no see. Delduel. Clearly, the distance between them was quite far. So far away that they would appear as small as dots to each other. But for some reason, her voice sounded as if she was right in front of them. Have you been well? Thud. Agni collapsed to the floor. He had already seen her once, so it was clear in his eyes. The woman who came out of the goat's stomach. Behind her, the giant goat leading the goats. Ma-ah-ah, the creepy cry of Shub-Niggurath. In the end it turned out like this. It had returned, the being that they thought would be a disaster the moment it entered the tower. A monster that they didn't even know the name of. Pull yourself together. Swish. Kubera grabbed the back of Agni's neck, who was sitting on the floor, and lifted him up. Agni, who was forced to stand up again, looked up at Kubera. She was also trembling, but in the end, Kubera had the stronger mentality. The situation is different now than it was then. At Kubera's words, Agni's gaze swept around the surroundings. The Demon King in the heavens, Asgard and Diva. Now, in this world, there were many high rankers who had spread out to every part of the tower. As if preparing for this day in advance, Odin had united the power of the guilds that were spread out all over the tower in the name of the Day of Harmony. Yes, they had to stop it somehow. They couldn't do anything by kneeling and sitting down. In the end, this fight wouldn't end unless they defeated Shub-Niggurath. This was their only chance to win. Waruk. Flames of crimson bloomed around Agni. Enveloped in dozens of spheres of flame, Agni's eyes gleamed the same color as the flames. We have one objective. Yes. Are the three gods still there? We do not know how long it will take. They are most mysterious. Is that so? He endured the gripping fear in his chest with his willpower. Only a few people here, including himself and Kubera, knew the true nature of Shub-Niggurath. Let's somehow hold out among ourselves for now. For now, they had no choice but to hold out until the three gods arrived. Let's go. Agni gave the order. Gu. The ship carrying the Diva's rankers began to move again. The battlefield, which had been at a standstill for a while due to the appearance of Shub-Niggurath, came back to life. They had to fight. That was all they could do now. Have you found hope? The whites of Shub-Niggurath's eyes, who was looking at Agni and Kubera, appeared. The eyes that had gained such focus were smiling. It's fun to play with you. The time when he was just sleeping in the dark forest came to mind. A world where he was bored no matter what he did. He felt gratitude for the foolish chaos that had taken him out of there. And then, I will tell you my name. It was a deal that should not have been made. Even though he knew what the guy's purpose was, the stakes were too high. An offer he couldn't refuse. I will accept that name. Clang, clang, numerous rankers surrounded Shub-Niggurath. Valkyrie of Asgard, the Diva's rankers, the Demon King's demons, and even the angels of heaven. They aimed their spears and swords and pulled the bowstrings. Tens of thousands of rankers prepared their skills and gathered their strength to hunt down a single being. Don't be scared, it's no different from any other time. Think of it as hunting a boss in a large dungeon. Don't leave your position, and don't get caught up in your allies' attacks. The rankers moved busily. However, their affiliations were all different, so it was difficult for them to form a formation and fight as an army in the first place. This guy is mine. Wung. Long claws stabbed at Shub-Niggurath's eyes. It was Asmodeus, one of the high rankers representing the Demon King. With 3 claws that seemed as if they would pierce Shub-Niggurath's eyes and split her head open any moment. But that was it. Ki-ing. It stopped in front of Shub-Niggurath's pupils and could not get any closer. You're my first lamb. Swoosh. Shub-Niggurath reached out. Asmodeus, feeling threatened, hastily tried to step back. If an attack failed against an opponent stronger than himself, he had to take a step back. But, my body, the claws and fists that were stretched out, and the 2 legs that were planted on the ground. Nothing moved an inch. Congratulations. Geek. Giik. Asmodeus, skin peeled off. Asmodeus could not do anything. Having come face to face with Shub-Niggurath, he felt his bones and muscles twist and his skin change color. On becoming my first lamb. The moment he heard her voice. Me, he let out a cry he had never made before. His consciousness faded away, and all that remained was his loyalty to Shub-Niggurath in front of him. Me. So another goat was born. What happened? Asmodeus is. It had happened in an instant. Asmodeus, who had been the first to charge curiously towards Shub-Niggurath. He had transformed into the same form as the other goats that had surrounded Shub-Niggurath. Who was Asmodeus? He was also one of the Demon Kings, a high ranker ranked in the 300s. Yet he had failed to even graze Shub-Niggurath, let alone inflict a wound on her. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, the sound of her counting reached the ears of the rankers surrounding Shub-Niggurath. I've lost 12 in such a short time. 12. It was the number of goats that had died. Shub-Niggurath's eyes curved softly. She looked at the rankers surrounding her and pointed her finger as if choosing her prey. Who shall I choose? Creepy. Gulping. Since there was no point in running forward, they began to take a step back one by one. This fight was not simply a matter of life and death. It was not simply a matter of living or dying. Dark attribute magic power surrounded Yuan. Among the various attributes, darkness had a destructive nature. It was not a problem to survive. Rankers were not beings who could simply survive. Most of them had come this far with the Jiu Wudo Dai. However, possibly dying, and, no longer being oneself, invoked completely different fears. After all, no one wanted to fight a battle that was absolutely absurd. Watching the rankers drift away on their own, Shub-Niggurath opened her mouth as if coaxing a child. Don't worry too much. Thud, she took a step back and then closed the distance again. After all, everyone will be able to enjoy the same glory. Crash. At that moment, a spear of pure white light, thrown from afar, pierced Shub-Niggurath's body. A spear that pierced her heart. Shub-Niggurath's body swayed for a moment before her head slowly turned forward. Oh, despite having her heart pierced, she spoke so calmly. As if there was no heart there. You're here, me. Me. It wasn't just Shub-Niggurath. The other goats that followed her also began to cry at the ranker who had thrown the spear. The rankers split to the left and right. A warrior in golden armor walked along the path that was created, approaching slowly. Thud, a commanding presence that dominated everything on the battlefield. He's here, finally. The rankers, who had been overwhelmed by Shub-Niggurath just moments ago, regained their faith. Yes, if they were with Isawa, they could win. I didn't think I'd see you so soon. Shub-Niggurath smiled. Clang. With a charming laugh, she broke the white spear embedded in her chest with just the strength of her grip. She stroked the goat next to her and asked. What is that bastard's name? Me. The goat was Asmodeus. Now, it was just one of the 1,000 goats Shub-Niggurath commanded. Shub-Niggurath could tell the name of the man walking towards her. Odin. Shub-Niggurath. She and Odin came face to face. It's a strong-sounding name. A chill ran through the conference room. Shiva glared at Yuan as if he would kill him any moment. What are you doing right now? Tisk, tisk, tisk. The power of darkness enveloped Eugene. Among the many attributes, it was darkness that possessed a particularly destructive nature. Third party, get lost. If you don't want to die for real. Kill me. What? I said, kill me. If you can. Eugene straightened his posture and sat up. It was as if he was opening his chest wide and saying, stab me. However, Shiva only threatened him and did not use his power directly on Eugene. It was the same even now. Right now, the distance between Eugene and Shiva was about the length of a round table. It was a distance that Shiva could easily cross and reach out to him at any time. It's not a matter of ability. Well, even if it's not now, there will come a time when you will die by my hand, but anyway. Eugene got up from his seat. The reason you can't kill me right now is because of this situation. Isn't that right? Eugene smiled. The reason why Shiva couldn't lay a hand on him and could only threaten him. That's because you can't give up your power in advance if you want to take the initiative. That was because he had to prepare for when the three of them became one again. But of course, Shiva did not acknowledge Eugene's words. Instead, as if he had been hit in the right spot, he glanced at Brahma, who was sitting to one side, sucking on a lollipop and watching the situation. Brahma, why, are you just going to leave this guy alone? What's wrong with that? He just said he'd stay by our side. A lukewarm response. Well, it wasn't a wrong statement. Eugene had not threatened Shiva or Brahma. He had just sat there quietly. It was Shiva who was provoking a fight by revealing his killing intent and kicking Eugene out. Don't worry about it. Anyway, when we become one again, we'll be able to deal with that guy. Yeah. At Brahma's words, Shiva's eyebrows twitched slightly. I understand. The unpleasant feeling did not go away. Brahma's words were not wrong, but Eugene's presence next to him continued to irritate him like a thorn in his throat. Surely, things won't go wrong because of that guy. As the unpleasantness grew, well, whatever. Brahma got up from his seat and turned towards the door. So, the three of us are back together again. Chapter 431. Thud. Vishnu entered silently. In fact, I could tell without even looking back. It was instinct. 10,000 years. I don't know. I don't remember. Does time matter? The three felt the same. The instinct to become one. A strange feeling as if they were drawn to each other like magnets. It had been 10,000 years. It was only natural to go back to the way it was, but for some, it felt like a horror. However, the situation is not good. Shiva took out the kit he had in his pocket and showed the message to the two who hesitated for a moment. We'd better hurry. Kubera. Asmodeus has been hit. It hadn't been long since the fight started, but the high ranker who was the linchpin of the Demon King had been hit. There wasn't much time until the fate Vishnu had seen. Flinch. Shiva looked at Wu Yun. Vishnu and Brahma, the two of them didn't seem to be interested in him. I wonder if they had a prior agreement. It would be nice if we could get rid of them together, but it didn't seem like the two of them would move with him. If so, there was nothing he could do. If he wasted his energy on Wu Yun, as he said, he might end up messing things up. Had there ever been so many conflicts in such a short period of time? Things were going differently than expected. And Wu Yun's eyes, as if he knew something about the three of them. The thought crossed his mind that this could not continue. However, this is not the time to worry about such a guy. Shiva decided to keep going even with the annoying nerve. Yes, Brahma was right. Once the three of us become one, what of such a guy? Well, then, whoosh, Shiva got up from his seat. The moment the eyes of the three met. Let's be one again. Screech. The magic power of the three people, which had been separated, began to fill the conference room. It started. The magic power began to mix naturally, as if it had been one from the beginning. Wu Yun got up from his seat and walked slowly into it. Thud. The conference room was certainly not that big. However, Wu Yun had already taken dozens of steps. It was in the space created by Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. What the hell is going on? It was a smoky haze. In a hazy space where you couldn't see even an inch ahead. Perhaps the reason I can't see anything is because this is a landscape that I'm not allowed to see. What if that's the case? Warrioric. Eugene's two eyes turned red. The flaming golden gaze, which had become quite advanced now. Those eyes lit up the fog. Flaming golden gaze, illuminates the unknown space. Whoa, the fog that had been obscuring my vision cleared away. As a result, it wasn't as if it had become completely clear, but I could see what was hidden within it. Vishnu. Beyond the cleared fog, Vishnu was sitting on a relatively flat rock as if using it as a chair, inside a dark cave with its ceiling and all four sides blocked off. No, it wasn't Vishnu. He had a face that resembled Vishnu's, but his eyes, hair color, and overall vibe were completely different from the Vishnu that Eugene knew. He wasn't Vishnu. This was a story from long ago. 10,000 years. No, even further back than that. See, Vishnu. No, the ancient god of old, whose name had now even been forgotten, mumbled. It's boring and dull. Words that were repeated over and over again. Amidst the smoke surrounding him, Vishnu's thoughts, illuminated by the flaming golden gaze, were transmitted to me. Should I die? I don't know how long he had been thinking the same thought. He could have just dissipated at any moment if he wanted to. He had the power to destroy anything, so ending his own life wouldn't have been difficult. However, then it'll be even more boring. No. It wasn't that it would be boring. I was lonely. That was the story that Vishnu was conveying. I was alone for too long. I was trapped under the ceiling, but during that long time, I didn't even once think about going outside. Why not? Because that place was my entire world to me. That narrow cave, I didn't know that there was an outside beyond it. As if he found it truly pitiful. Vishnu shook his head as he said that. It was ridiculous. He was considered the greatest being in this tower, yet he was no different from a frog in a well who didn't even know how vast the world was. Ironically, this story came about from the question of, why did you become three? That's why I decided to become three. I thought that I could overcome my loneliness even a little bit that way. That's not much of a reason. It wasn't that big of a deal. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Odin still hadn't thrown Gingnir, unsure whether Shub-Niggurath was real or not. Shub-Niggurath asks Odin to make her a special child, and Odin suspects that she isn't the main body. Odin asks why Shub-Niggurath isn't in the form of a giant goat, and she replies that she will one day stab Gingnir into Odin's head. Odin leaps into the herd of goats and begins fighting, and the other rankers move to assist him. Shub-Niggurath watches their fight with her arms crossed. Everyone has different values. At that time, being alone was the greatest pain for me. Thinking about the conversation at the time, Yu-One looked at Vishnu in front of him. One that became three because of loneliness. However, the process of those three becoming one again was not so smooth. I thought that if I became one after being split into three, I would go back to the way I was before. However, the result was much different than I thought. Like an idiot, he had only grown in age, but he was still just a child. Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, who were split into three, each had different ideals and strengths. And Vishnu was the center of them. He had lived for a long time without control of himself. Swish, the outstretched hand erased the scenery of the cave along with Vishnu, who had appeared before him. Anyway, everything hidden in this smoke was fake. The opponent had hidden another lie within the lie, blocking Yu-1 from interfering with him. And beyond that divided space. Roar, Yu-1 saw the truth that had been hidden. Vishnu and Brahma lying on the floor. And Shiva looking down at the two. He glared at Yu-1. You've finally come. It was as if he had known he would come. What are you doing? Didn't you see? Greed flickered in Shiva's eyes as he looked down at the two fallen. I'm taking back what was originally mine. Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva. The names of three people who had been separated from one. They hadn't said it out loud, but it was a common thought that the three of them shared. And that was why Vishnu had wanted to become one again so badly. I am the real one. Under the sky where the fight with Shub-Niggurath had begun. Thud, rumble. As the ground began to cave in, the surrounding rankers began to distance themselves one by one to avoid it. Don't get caught up in it. Provide cover from a distance. Cover my ass, hurry over here. It was only a few times of combining. Odin's fist had collapsed the solid ground that had been supporting the castle, changing the shape of the battlefield. The Odin who had been fighting while taking care of his comrades, safety like before, was gone. Shub-Niggurath wasn't an opponent he could afford to fight with such margin. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens of magic circles intertwined with complex formulas compressed at the end of Odin's fist. Boom, bang, Odin's fist struck Shub-Niggurath's chest. He could not only throw spears and handle magic. Before Odin originally learned magic from Mimir, he was known as the top martial artist in this tower. Shub-Niggurath's body was pushed back and sent flying. And only then did the rankers who saw that have hope. It hit, as expected of King Odin. An opponent that Asmodeus, the arch-high ranker of the Demon King, could not even touch. However, Odin was different. Not only did his fist reach Shub-Niggurath, but it also sent her flying dozens of meters away. In terms of strength, Odin seemed to be one step ahead. Thud, Odin took a step towards Shub-Niggurath. Do I look like a goat to you? Thud, thud, Shub-Niggurath dusted off her chest, which had been hit by Odin's fist. Her body was covered in dust. Even though she had been hit by a fist reinforced with dozens of magics, she did not seem to have taken much damage. I'm thinking about it. What do you mean? I think I'll have to make you a little special. Shub-Niggurath looked at Odin with interesting stomach, interesting eyes. Odin frowned at that unpleasant gaze and clenched his fist again. Why did you crawl in here? Don't be curious about things you can't handle. Right now, I'm enough to make you despair. I don't know about that. You don't seem so scary right now. Why are you in that form? On the first floor, Shub-Niggurath had the appearance of a giant goat. Because of her appearance, Yu-1 called her the goat of the Black Forest who leads 1,000 goats. Why aren't you throwing that spear? Shub-Niggurath recalled Gingnir, which Odin had thrown. The spear that had injured her ontology main body at the time. The reason Shub-Niggurath had remembered the Odin in front of her so vividly was also because of Gingnir. It's a waste to use it now. Look forward to it. You never know when my spear will pierce your head. I guess you don't think this is the main body. Odin's reason for not throwing Gingnir yet. It was because he couldn't tell if the Shub-Niggurath before his eyes was real or not. The situation wasn't all that bad for Shub-Niggurath. Well, whatever. She smiled as if enjoying the situation and looked beyond Odin at the numerous rankers who were already filling the sky. Diablo and Susano, Agni and Kubera, Brunhilde. Every single one of them was a high ranker whose name shook the tower. Fortunately, it seems there are many useful ingredients here. Losing the goats here didn't matter. Why worry when there were so many ingredients to create more goats? Violet strands of wool rose and wriggled from the ground beneath Shub-Niggurath's feet. Squirm, squirm, ba, ba, a herd of goats rose from the forest of wool on the ground. Odin looked at the goats. The first goat Asmodeus had transformed into was now mixed in with the herd of thousands of goats, making it difficult to find. That shouldn't be too difficult. The moment she said that. Wung. Without hesitation, Odin cast magic into both fists and leapt into the goats. Kwa Wung. A goat's neck snapped back. The other fist burst the body of another goat, and from behind, another goat bit Odin's shoulder. Swish. Odin grabbed the scruff of the goat biting his shoulder with his free hand. Thud. The goat's neck snapped back. He swung the goat around, throwing off the goats charging at him. It was like a predator had leapt into the goats. And following that predator, help King Odin get rid of the goats. Those with recovery skills, the rankers who had been watching the fight began to move in droves. And that fierce battle, let's see how far you get. Shub-Niggurath watched their antics, arms crossed. Chapter 432. After the fight began, Odin's goal from the beginning until now had been only one thing. Bang! He kicked away the goat blocking his view with his fist. When another goat bit his calf, he lifted his leg and slammed it into the ground. Rumble, rip, the hard ground caved in. As the goats that had been charging were bounced away in all directions, Odin charged towards Shub-Niggurath. However, another herd of goats that had approached at some point blocked his view. Stubborn, woo, a large-scale magic circle formed in front of his fist. As Odin was about to unleash his magic, quat, the goats blocking his view were blown away from Odin. An explosive magic that detonates the magic power in the atmosphere. Odin only knew of one ranker who mainly used this kind of magic. You've gotten old too. A small, old man floated above Odin's head. It was Mimir. The goats, feeling threatened, cried out at Mimir. Mimir frowned at the goats' reaction and flicked his fingers. Tisk, magic power compressed around the goats. You're no different from a beast if you rush in without knowing you're going to die. Wah, poof, high-density compressed magic power tended to catch fire easily. The goats were caught in the explosions that occurred in rapid succession and were blown away to the left and right. It's a bit cleaner now. Mimir clapped his hands as if he was relieved. The sight of Mimir floating in the air and pushing away the goats in an instant caused the rankers who had been fighting hard to stir. Who was that? Do you know him? It's my first time seeing him. Mimir, isn't that Mimir, the friend of King Odin? Mimir's name was famous. He had founded Asgard together with Odin and was Odin's closest friend, so there was no ranker who didn't know him. However, that didn't mean that Mimir's face was well known. Since he could only escape from the curse of knowledge and be active for 1 year out of 100. Furthermore, Mimir spent even that 1 year hardly doing any external activities and used it to spend time with Odin. In other words, it meant that there was no need for him to show his face to the outside world. I heard that he's much lower in rank than King Odin. With that stature, how can he rank high if he doesn't do any activities? Is that so? Hey, then who's number 1 in the rankings? I don't know, why are you asking me? Anyway, long live Mimir. Mimir's appearance heated up the battlefield around him once more. Morale was greatly boosted. Mimir made a path between Odin and Shub-Niggurath. I'll leave the rest to you. Cuckoo. Odin's eyes lit up as the goats blocking his way were cleared. Oh yeah, how long has it been since I fought alongside Mimir like this? For the first time in a long time, I felt secure with someone watching my back. Maybe that's why I was able to just run forward. Screech. A long spear was created in Odin's hand. Ding-ner. Odin gripped it tightly and kicked off the ground. Boom. The distance closed in. Swoosh. Roar. Along with a flash of pure white light, it seemed as though the tip of Odin's spear pierced Shub-Niggurath's neck. At that moment, swish, Shub-Niggurath's hand stretched forward. Squawk. Quote! Shub-Niggurath's hand grabbed Ding-ner. No, that wasn't a hand. A goat. It was a goat's teeth with 2 small horns, without eyes or a nose. Shub-Niggurath's hand had taken on that form. Odin, who had been looking closely at her hand, lifted his head. The moment he met eyes with Shub-Niggurath, Odin was able to see the form of a large goat behind her, which he had been trying to see. But, creepy, you do not know me. Shub-Niggurath's voice, with its purple irises. It was completely different from the calm and beautiful female voice that Odin had heard just before. There was no pitch to the voice, and it was impossible to tell if it was sound or text. Above all, the moment he heard the voice, Odin was able to catch a glimpse of Shub-Niggurath's true form. Rumble, rumble, a sense of oppression weighed down on Odin's body. Rip, the ground collapsed and crumbled, and blood vessels burst all over Odin's body. He lacked the strength to push himself up with his body. No, it wasn't just that he lacked the strength. It was because of the will that had instantly fallen to the ground. The monster from another world that had broken through the wall and entered the tower. To stop that monster, Odin and Mimir had prepared for the Day of Unity. They had thought that this force would be enough to stop it. If their strength was scattered, that would be one thing, but if they could combine all of their strength and fight like they were now, they would definitely have a chance of winning. But what I saw back then, it seemed that I had been mistaken after all. The deep ground with no end in sight. As he fell into it, Odin looked at Shub-Niggurath, who was looking down at him. It wasn't all of it. Odin realized then that the giant goat he had seen wasn't just one. Crack, crack, crackle, black sparks flew between U1 and Shiva. The two clashed right after. Flash, boom, U1 and Shiva, who had disappeared from their spots in the blink of an eye, clashed in midair. After clashing once, Yuan and Shiva took a step back at the same time and each drew their weapons. Yuan drew the sword he always used, and Shiva drew a long, black sickle like the one Hades wielded. Swoosh, zing, the two weapons, imbued with dark attribute mana, clashed. Shiva's eyes lit up as he looked at Yuan, who wielded the same attribute of mana. You're different from what I've heard. What is? Fighting style or the attribute of magic power? I'm originally versatile. In the world, Yuan was mainly known as a spearman who handled lightning attribute magic power. Also, as another feature, he was famous as a summoner who handled Susanoo. Considering that he handles undead summoners, it was natural for him to use dark attribute magic power, but he could handle it so freely. Impertinent bastard. Swish, thud, a scythe flying from two directions. Yuan's sword struck one of them. Clang, chew. Shiva's scythe grazed his cheek. The ability of the dark attribute magic power is corrosion. Blood flowed down his cheek, and a stinging pain ran across his face. Swoosh, Yuan wiped the blood flowing down his cheek. It was faster than he had heard. At this level, it was comparable to Satan in his prime. Yuan looked at the scythe spinning in Shiva's hand. Shiva, who was spinning the scythe, had a proud face from the beginning until now. I see you have the ability. But this is my space. Did you take the power from Brahma and Vishnu? Didn't you expect this much? Swish, the spinning scythe stopped in Shiva's hand. And yet, you dare to crawl here on your own feet. Qua, as the scythe swung once, Yuan's body was cut in half. Just for a moment, it looked that way to Shiva. However, whoosh, Yuan's new form disappears from its place. The illusion was for a moment, and Sina's scythe moved smoothly after Yuan. Clang, clang, the two scythes and swords clashed without rest. Yuan's eyes were always on Shiva's eyes, not the scythes. Whoosh, red-hot eyes. Shiva realized how Yuan was able to dodge and block his scythe like this. Is that Wan Jiamzheng? Despite the significantly slower speed, Yuan didn't seem to have much trouble blocking his scythe. But that was all. In his current state, he was just barely blocking it. Just being desperate to defend would never win. Furthermore, this was his space. The game is already over. Creak. The corners of his mouth curled up. Screech. With an unpleasant sound, Shiva's scythes crossed to form an X shape. Yuan's red-hot eyes glistened at the ominous air current. This is a bit dangerous. Just because he knew about it didn't mean he could block or dodge it. Sometimes there are things you can't deal with even if you know about them. There was only one thing needed now. Crackle. It was a greater force than before. Heart of Oranos starts. Tartarus gate opens. Kwa Wang, Tartarus, magic power spewed out from the ring he was wearing. That magic power and Shiva's scythe collided. Quack. As Shiva's scythe swung, a long X-shaped crack appeared. In an instant, she swung her scythe 4 times in order to cut Yuan's body into 4. However, in the next moment, the eyes of Shiva, who was swinging her scythe, grew wide. He blocked this too. The power of Vishnu and Brahma was slowly returning, and the strengthened power was offsetting the power of Yuan's sword. Until just a moment ago, it hadn't been such a big deal. After all, Vishnu and Brahma had already collapsed, and their power was becoming his own. No matter how strong Yuan was as a high ranker, he was nothing more than a mere insect in front of him. However, is this not enough? It was an attack that should have at least caused some damage, even if it couldn't kill him. Nevertheless, he managed to block his scythe, albeit barely. It meant that his calculations were wrong. What was the reason? His chest felt a little stuffy. Snap, he gritted his teeth at his wounded pride. You're doing something ugly. Crash, Shiva's scythe cut through Yuan's body again. Thud, again, Yuan blocked his scythe, which he thought would be impossible to block. The amount of magical power flowing out of the ring was not normal. Shiva gritted his teeth and pressed Yuan. Die, crash, he pressed on without stopping. Shiva glared at him and forced Yuan into a corner. Die, die, bang, swish, wounds appeared one by one on Yuan's body. He thought that he only needed a little more. This time, for sure. Keying, magical power surged on the two scythes. The intensity of the attack grew stronger and Yuan's eyes fluttered. I can't do it. Was he finally giving in to his strength? That was the moment when Shiva finally smiled. If you keep this up, I might end up killing you. What in the world did that mean? Yuan's words sounded as if he had been watching him all this time. Shiva, who was about to swing his scythe, paused for a moment. Only then did he realize that Yuan hadn't moved a single step from his spot at some point. What the hell happened? He was sure that he had done his best. Even if it was Kim Yuan, he shouldn't be able to be this relaxed in front of him. This didn't make sense. Hey, you two. And then, unbelievable words came out of Yuan's mouth. Can you stop pretending to be asleep and help me out now? Pretending to be asleep. Shiva tilted his head for a moment, not knowing what that meant. And then, no way. Shiva's head turned to follow Yuan's gaze. And there, my head hurts because it's so noisy. We weren't pretending to be asleep. We were really asleep. Vishnu and Brahma, who should have been unconscious and collapsed, were staggering to their feet. Chapter 433. Shiva stood there with a blank look on his face, as if time had stopped. What the hell was going on? How had Vishnu and Brahma, who had clearly lost consciousness, gotten up? What? His mouth hung open unnaturally, as if his jaw had dropped. Vishnu and Brahma, who had awakened from their sleep, looked at Shiva with the same eyes. We believed that we were one. We thought that we would all think the same. As if they were speaking as one, Vishnu's words were naturally followed by Brahma's. But we were wrong. Why was that? The moment the three tried to become one, Shiva's darkness devoured Vishnu and Brahma. As if it had been prepared for a long time, the spirits of Brahma and Vishnu were sucked into the depths of darkness. If they hadn't listened to Yuan's words and regained their senses, if they had trusted Shiva completely and not resisted it, the two spirits might have been completely devoured by Shiva by now. I thought this was my space. Swoosh. The smoky smoke that had been blooming in the dark space cleared away. A blue sky appeared in the world where they stood, and a clear river flowed under the ground. Shiva's world was changing. That wasn't it. This world hadn't been his alone from the beginning. From the moment Vishnu and Brahma began to regain their senses, this world had become something that belonged to all three of them. Clang. Shiva's hand tightened around the sickle. The thought of devouring the spirits of the other two and becoming one had gone wrong. Vishnu and Brahma didn't trust Shiva. Thanks to that, the moment Shiva's darkness tried to devour them, they resisted it and regained their senses completely. The reason for that was obvious. Shiva glared at Yuan. It's because of that bastard. Yuan had done only two things. Vishnu and Brahma. He had planted doubts about Shiva in the minds of the two. And he had protected the two of them here for a short while, preventing Shiva's darkness from devouring their spirits by force. It hadn't been a difficult thing to do. Isn't ranking something you shouldn't trust? Shiva's pupils, which had been furrowed as if to ask what Yuan meant, grew large. It was what Diablo had said the day before. You're nothing without those two. Three who had been one. However, the smallest of them was Shiva. Yuan's words had touched Shiva's pride. Zing. The space where Yuan and Shiva stood warped in an instant. Using a technique similar to the shukuchi, the distance between Shiva and Yuan narrowed. And at that moment, when the distance becomes close, swag, Shiva felt a sharp, hot sensation piercing his chest and shoulder. What did you think you could do to win? Qua. Quote exclamation mark quote. A long wound that ran from his chest to his shoulder. Shiva raised his hand and touched his shoulder. He didn't know when the blade had pierced him. No, rather than that. How did I react? Shiva turned his head and looked at Yuan, who was now standing behind him. And the moment their eyes met, golden, Shiva could see that Yuan had different eyes from his usual golden crow. Eyes that shone with a golden light. It felt like a level higher than the golden crow. Eyes of prophecy, eyes that could see the future that one desired. Whether the distance is shortened for you or me, it's the same. If he didn't know, that would be one thing, but now that he knew of the skill's existence, there was no reason for Yuan not to use the eyes of prophecy. I wondered when you'd use it. That skill. The day before. Yuan had watched Diablo and Shiva clash. Shiva had used a skill that used darkness to warp space in order to subdue Diablo, and Yuan had been able to see the skill he had used in advance. If he knew what kind of skill it was. And if it was a skill in the same vein as the shukuchi, which could close the distance in an instant. It wasn't so difficult to use the shortened distance to his advantage. Vishnu approached Shiva. He faced him with his usual gentle voice. Why did you do that? Quote. Blocking the blood flowing from his shoulder with his hand, Shiva glared into Vishnu's eyes. Then, bam, a small hand, like that of a fern, struck the back of Shiva's head. It was Brahma, who had finally lost his patience and hit Shiva's head. What have you done well, whoosh ssi. Bam. Shiva gritted his teeth and raised his head again. He saw Vishnu, who had done nothing, instead of Brahma, who had hit his head. Then, you see, what? You are real. He continued to speak in a small voice as if he were crawling. I thought about it for a long time. Who among us is real? What would we have been like if we had been one? Resentment was mixed in Shiva's eyes. To find out, I looked for the place where we originally were. Somewhere in this vast tower, under a ceiling where the sky is not visible. That place. So did you find it? I found it. I didn't expect much, actually. It was just curiosity and useless obsession. His true self, who had become one. At first, he was just curious about that. That's when I realized, we were originally one, but we were not one. What do you mean? We are just pieces that fell off of you. Vishnu's pupils shook. All three of them didn't have any memories of when they were one. He thought that the memories of that time would probably come back after they became one. Do you know why your ranking is so high among the three of us? Have you never thought it was strange? At Shiva's words, Brahma's gaze turned to Vishnu. Come to think of it, it was strange. Even though they were three that had split from one, their rankings were different. Brahma, whose activities were the least noticeable, was the lowest, and Shiva was next. However, Vishnu's ranking was too high compared to the three of them. Third place, right after Odin. That's why the majority of rankers said that Vishnu's ranking, who hadn't shown any particular activity or ability, was a bubble. However, the administration knew that we are nothing more than fragments that fell off of you, Vishnu. The truth was a little different. In the first place, they were not three that had split from one. They were just two that had originated from one. Do you understand now, Brahma? Shiva grinned and chattered towards Brahma. We're not becoming one. We're just being eaten by that bastard. Why, you talk dirty. Flick. Brahma flicked his ear. As if he had heard something he shouldn't have. Shiva's expression momentarily dulled, as if he had heard something he couldn't hear. And then, that's right, you've been a fool since the old days. Brahma denied Shiva's thoughts that had continued for 10,000 years. You say that the two of us came from Vishnu. So what? At least I should understand it. Of course you would think that way. You don't want to disappear. So what? Is it unfair? Goo goo, goo goo goo. Shiva's knees buckled, a sense of weight crushing his body. The power emanating from Brahma's small stature overwhelmed Shiva. What you're saying now is that you tried to take something that wasn't yours in the first place. Cuck. There was the taste of blood in his mouth. The moment he was about to rush at Brahma in resentment, a sharp knife came to his neck. Stay still. Yuan's sword. When did the tip of the sword get here? Shiva's pupils shook. Thinking that it was really the end now. Thud. The strength supporting his legs gave out, and Shiva fell to his knees. Tisk. Yuan looked at Shiva as if he was pathetic. To think that this guy was also a part of Vishnu. Well then, Yuan's gaze turned to Vishnu, whose face was still emotionless and calm. No matter how clean a person is, there must be a dark side. When Vishnu, who was one, created the other two, he wanted to create friends and brothers with different aspects. Brahma was a pure friend like a child. That's why he didn't grow taller. Vishnu, who was one. It was his story about another side of him. Shiva was my shadow. Shadow. Everyone has an evil side. I do too. Shiva was that side. I don't really understand. Not everyone shows their evil side just because they have one. Just as everyone has an evil side, everyone has a good side. It's just that the way they appear on the outside is different depending on which side is bigger. It was difficult to fully understand those words at the time. But now that he saw it with his own eyes, he thought he could understand it. The smallest and most insignificant. Shiva was small compared to Vishnu or Brahma. It didn't mean his size, but the size of the presence he felt from him was small. Everyone lives with various aspects, but the sizes of each aspect are not the same. That's because there is no such thing as a perfect square. And among them, Shiva was the smallest aspect of Vishnu. What are you going to do now? Yuan took his attention off of Shiva and looked at Vishnu and Brahma. The two people who had come to their senses would no longer be defeated by Shiva. The darkness that Shiva had prepared had already been removed, and he was too small compared to the two of them. Now, there was no part for Yuan to intervene. And the answer to Yuan's question had already been decided. Things went a little wrong, but we have to become one again. The opponent was Shub-Niggurath. Originally, he was an existence that he should have met and fought much later than this. Fortunately or unfortunately, Shub-Niggurath had entered the tower alone. And to stop him, Vishnu's power was needed. The power of the greatest being in this tower. Yes, then hurry up. What are you going to do now? Are you going to fight right away? Yuan shook his head at Vishnu and Brahma's questions. Not right away. Then, there's one more thing I have to do. With those words, Yuan removed the sword that had been pointed at Shiva's neck. I'll tell you the details later. If we're all still alive by then. At the sight of Yuan's figure gradually fading, Vishnu and Brahma nodded their heads. It was the right thing to say. Now was not the time to have a leisurely conversation. Even at this moment, the fight against Shub-Niggurath was in full swing outside. Yuan looked at the three gods of Deva, including Shiva, with his face full of despair. With this, the first condition is complete. One of the conditions for capturing Shub-Niggurath. The existence of Vishnu, who had become one. With this, one of the conditions had been met. And now, I'm sorry to wake you up like this. The egg of is silent. The egg where Dana was sleeping. Yuan, who had been silently waiting for it to hatch, began to stare into it. I need one more insurance now. Chapter 434. Meh. The cries of 1,000 goats caused the rankers to lose their minds. Odin fell into Shub-Niggurath's hands. At the same time, the morale that had risen had fallen even lower than before with his fall. And between the rankers, Diablo clicked his tongue in disappointment and shook his head. He stopped swinging his fist for a moment and stood still. He listened to the screams of the battlefield. Og. My shoulder. Falling. Awa. The battle between the demoralized rankers and the goats was one-sided. No one would call this a fight. This was a hunt. This isn't fun. He didn't like it. The fight he had been expecting so much was so one-sided. Thump. A vein popped out on Diablo's forehead. He could see the Deva rankers running away from the goats in fear. The Valkyries were fighting back with a will to die, but they were shivering in their shoulders with fear before they could even clash. It was pathetic. More than anything else, what he couldn't stand was the fact that the demons were the same. PFF'd. A demon ranker who had been hit in the arm by Diablo fell to the ground. He had been running away from the goats until just now. Are you that afraid to die? Diablo Lord. Are you afraid? No. At Diablo's question, the demon shook his head and closed his eyes tightly. Even he knew that it didn't make sense. What did it mean to say that he wasn't afraid to die and run away without fighting? It was like avoiding a fox and running into a tiger. My life is over. Yes, it's natural to be afraid. The demon carefully opened his tightly closed eyes. Yes, Diablo didn't reach out to him. Instead, his gaze was fixed on Shub-Niggurath, who was riding on the back of a goat. Because if you die, you won't be able to fight anymore. He was afraid because he couldn't fight anymore. The demon understood the words in his head, but he couldn't understand them all. No matter how much their race was crazy about fighting, they weren't to the point of overcoming their fear of death. But Diablo now looked like. That's why I'm scared too. He had overcome even that fear. He thought his head would be crushed any minute, but Diablo turned around and walked towards the herd of goats. And over Diablo's head, zing, the horns that had pierced his head seemed to grow longer. No way. The demon's eyes widened, but the thought of, no way, was only for a moment. He thought that it might be natural. There was no way Diablo wouldn't reveal his true form in this situation. A goat bared its teeth at Diablo, who was approaching their mother. Crack, its mouth opened to an unnatural size. The goat opened its mouth wide as if to swallow Diablo in one gulp and lunged. And that moment, whoosh, crack, a red tail that flew from behind Diablo sent the goat's torso flying. Bang, the flying goat crashed into another goat and fell to the floor. Diablo raised his scaly forearm behind the goat, which was staggering from the shock. His body size, which had suddenly doubled in size, was now twice its original size. Don't hide among the cubs and come at me. Thud. Diablo shook his long red tail and glared with his bloodshot eyes. You goat bastard. Bang, Diablo's tail hit the ground. The shattered ground rose high, expressing Diablo's anger. He ignored the goats and strode towards Shub-Niggurath. And in response to Diablo's actions, Shub-Niggurath also shook off the goats that had been surrounding him. The reactions of those who are terrified are mostly similar. Choking on fear and strangling themselves, or running away. Crunch. Shub-Niggurath approached Diablo with an interesting expression. But your reaction is neither of those. You know you're going to die now, but... Diablo smiled, enjoying it. Diablo had now completely transformed into the form of a demon. His entire body was covered in red scales, and 8 rooted horns appeared on his head, revealing a demon in front of him. Diablo, the strongest demon and the monarch of the demonic world. He revealed his true form. Rumble, rumble, that's right. Diablo raised his head, revealing his true form. Red was mixed with the purple in the sky. The magical energy emitted from Diablo's body covered the world. Crack, crackle, the ground beneath his feet cracked and heat like lava spewed up from within. His mouth slowly opened. That's right, I'm so happy I could go crazy. Diablo was not consumed by fear. Rather, he was enjoying this moment when he might die at any moment. Thousands of years ago, Baal, who had come to find Diablo, who had become the king of the demons, asked. It must not be fun. It was a short and sharp remark. However, Diablo, who was sitting on the throne yawning, replied as if he knew everything. That's right, it's not fun. You must have seen a lot of blood on your way up to here. Isn't it enough yet? Diablo shed a lot of blood until he became the king of the demons. More than half of the demon kings who had beheaded and ripped out hearts on their way to this position had been subdued by Diablo alone, and he had stopped the bloody purge. Insufficient doesn't do it justice. What do you mean? My thirst is never ending. No matter how much I drink, it never gets filled, so I simply stopped trying to fill it. It was a fearsome statement. He wasn't trying to fill it because it couldn't be filled in the first place. Do you plan on enduring it forever? What choice do I have? I can't bring myself to kill my own kind. It must be difficult, but I have something to look forward to. Something to look forward to. Diablo nodded his head. As he spoke his next words, Diablo's expression was more joyous than ever before. Someday, someone stronger than me will appear. Perhaps I won't be able to avoid fighting them. Just imagining it made his palms sweat. His voice gradually grew louder with excitement, and he shifted positions from leaning against the back to sitting up straight. The only way to quench this thirst is for me to die. It took me far too long to realize this. Having said that, Diablo closed his eyes shut. At this rate, he seemed likely to kill Baal, who was right before his eyes, just like last time. So for that enjoyment, I plan to endure. Diablo had endured for thousands of years like that. And now, he had found an opponent to quench the thirst he had endured for all that time. Whoosh! Flames wrapped around Shub-Niggurath's body. Crimson flames that blocked his vision. The hellhounds howled at the heat, which was hotter than lava. Shub-Niggurath looked at the blinding flames. He couldn't see anything else because the flames covered his entire field of vision. Screech! Diablo's figure emerged from within the flames. I have been waiting for this day. Slash! A hand shot out from the flames and grabbed Shub-Niggurath by the neck. The day I would die. Sizzle! Diablo's figure moved right up to Shub-Niggurath. Shub-Niggurath opened his mouth as Diablo's face drew near. There are many interesting beings in this world. Slash! He grabbed the arm that was holding him by the scruff of the neck. This is my reward for waiting so long. Screech! Shub-Niggurath also began to gradually reveal his true form as he extended the horns on his head. Become my sheep and fight for me for eternity. Whoosh! Flames surged up. The ground where Diablo had been standing had already melted and disappeared. The surroundings had transformed into a sea of flames, and the sky was covered in red. This was the power of Diablo's true form. Get away from the flames. Hurry! Screech! A strong wind blew and scattered the flames in all directions. Diablo's flames made no distinction between friend or foe, and Michael stood in their way to prevent Diablo's flames from spreading to his allies. At Michael's command, the demons and angels moved busily. And beyond that pandemonium, the battlefield suddenly turned into Muspelheim. This amount of flames might be enough to. A glimmer of hope flickered in the rankers, hearts at Diablo's flames. Look at these flames. They were flames that rivaled Surtur, the king of Muspelheim and Odin's rival. How many beings could survive being engulfed in such flames? It didn't matter if they didn't kill him. There were still many rankers and high rankers remaining here. No matter how monstrous the enemy, if they could just inflict a fatal wound, they could gain the upper hand in the battle. Diablo's true form, which he had never revealed even in the Tenma Great War, seemed more than capable of rivaling Shub-Niggurath. However, what an idiot! Susanoo, who was fighting alongside him at the forefront, found Diablo's actions foolish. He must be the only one who doesn't realize that he'll die a horrible death if he keeps this up. Diablo's existence was a refreshing shock to Susanoo. He too had sought out battlefields on his own 2 feet and had risked his life in countless battles. However, Diablo yearned for something even greater than Susanoo. Susanoo sensed in Diablo, who had transformed into his true form, the same longing for battle that he had once endured. A fight to the death. Susanoo had already experienced such a fight, and as a result, he had met his end as he did now. However, the battle with the Yamata no Orochi and the being before him now were on completely different levels. Above all else, If Diablo were to be defeated in vain with this move, the morale of the allied forces would plummet, and victory might never be achieved. I have no choice. His deliberation was brief. He had to make his move before those flames were extinguished. He didn't know if Diablo could do it alone, but if he joined him. Screech. Just as Susanoo took a step forward. Boom. A bolt of golden lightning shot up from the ground to the sky. Susanoo turned his head at the wall of electricity that blocked his path. He had almost been electrocuted and turned into a human torch. Only one ranker in this tower could wield golden lightning of this caliber. Don't do anything reckless. He didn't need to see the owner of the voice to know who it was. Susanoo turned his head. Before he could confirm the source of the lightning, the surroundings began to stir. It's Zeus. Zeus is here, a high ranker with an appearance that stood out even among these numerous rankers. Along with Odin, he was considered to be one of the kings who ruled this tower. The battlefield is in chaos. The celestial god, Zeus. He had arrived on the battlefield with Heracles. Chapter 435. The heavenly god, Zeus. And the giant slaying Heracles. The two were famous high rankers, even in this tower. Zeus, the king of Olympus, needed no introduction, and Heracles was a hero of the Gigantomachy. Although there were only two of them, their appearance was enough to change the atmosphere of the battlefield. Thud. Why are you here, Heracles? Question was directed at Susanoo, who had approached him. Yuan wasn't here, so why were you here? And also, where is Yuan? Master sent me. Master. Thinking that it was a term used to refer to Yuan, Heracles showed a surprised expression for a moment. No one could have imagined that such a title would come out of Susanoo's mouth, even if it was a relationship between a summoner and a summoned creature. What? No, it's nothing. Why does it matter what I call him? This isn't the time to be nitpicking. His tone was sarcastic, as if he had been pricked. He wanted to tease him a little more, but it was definitely not the time for that. That's true. Both of you are just making small talk. At Zeus's remark, Heracles and Susanoo shut their mouths at the same time. It wasn't Yuan's order, and there was no need to listen to him, but Susanoo couldn't easily defy Zeus's words. He felt a certain dignity from him that he had only felt from Odin. For now, what are we going to do with that idiot? As soon as Zeus finished speaking, roar, something was thrown out of the pillar of fire that Diablo had created. A red dot that flew up into the sky. It quickly fell back down. Boom, goo, a circular pit was created on the ground where the dot had fallen. Susanoo turned his head in the direction of the pit and saw Diablo lying in a large, big, shape. Tisk, how did he come back? It doesn't look like he's okay. He's still alive, somehow. Creak, Diablo staggered to his feet, his long claws scraping the floor. As soon as he got up, he grabbed his head. Diablo shook his head violently and muttered. What the hell happened? What the hell happened? Diablo risked his life for that. Annoyance was mixed into his tone. His fight had been interrupted. That was something Diablo hated more than anything. As he turned his head, Diablo's eyes caught sight of an old man with countless wrinkles. Individual actions are prohibited. The reason Diablo had been flung away. It was because of Mimir's magic. Glaring at Mimir with eyes ablaze, Diablo shakily got up from where he had fallen. What the hell had happened? Calm down for a moment. Both your body and mind are like rags right now. What? Stumbling slightly, Diablo tried to recall his memories. He was definitely fighting Shub-Niggurath in those flames. But he had no memory of the fight itself. Of course not, since he didn't remember fighting. Truly, there was nothing left in his mind. Damn it. Clack, the sound of sharp teeth grinding together. Mimir looked at Diablo with pity. If you're so upset about losing, don't force yourself to. This isn't any fun. What? Mimir spoke in disbelief. No matter how long he had lived and how much he knew, this was the first time he had seen someone so crazy. Mimir had a single impression of Diablo, who was now focused on fighting. Not even the curse of knowledge can explain this guy. To think there was someone this crazy in the world. Still, it seemed like he somewhat understood what kind of guy Diablo was. That was why Mimir was able to find a way to control Diablo, who was about to charge again. Will you listen to me? Speak, I'll let you have the hottest fight you can imagine. Diablo's eyes gleamed. No matter how crazy he was about fighting and how bloodthirsty he was, he knew that Mimir was his opponent. If it was a plan that he had made, then it was definitely reliable. Whoosh, the place Diablo had been thrown from. As the flames cleared away, the view of Shub-Niggurath, who had been hidden, reappeared. Mimir looked at Shub-Niggurath. On her face, which seemed somewhat displeased, he could see a small scratch. So it wasn't all nonsense after all. Flick. Diablo glared at her, growling. Mimir shook his head as he looked at Diablo, who was still blazing with magic and flames. The result Diablo risked his life to obtain was just that. As soon as that thought ended. That's a monster. The staggering Diablo forced his body up and opened his mouth. You and Odin said you saw the main body of that guy on the first floor, right? That's right. It's still just a feeling, but I don't think that's all there is. Not all. What do you mean? It must not have been that long. But during that time, Diablo seemed to have felt quite a lot from his fight with Shub-Niggurath. That guy has no intention of fighting right now. Sometimes, actions and gazes can convey more than words. Diablo tended to feel that more so, especially while fighting. If you clashed fists up close and looked into their eyes, you could tell. This fight was between just the two of them right now. The actual opponent, Shub-Niggurath, wasn't very interested in this fight. Right now, she was waiting for something, someone who wasn't here. Shub-Niggurath was enjoying this situation plenty until that someone arrived. There was a hindrance. Even though their fights had been interrupted, Shub-Niggurath and Diablo's reactions were completely different. Unlike Diablo, who was filled with rage, she just clenched and unclenched her fists a few times as if she was slightly disappointed. I almost had it. Me. The goats around Shub-Niggurath cried along with her disappointment. And among them, there was a goat that cried particularly loudly. Me. Shub-Niggurath's gaze turned toward the goat that was crying unusually loudly. She didn't remember the names of all the goats she kept, but she remembered the name of this goat. She couldn't help it. After all, he was a new child she had just gotten. Are you after that guy too? Asmodeus. Me. The goat replied. Asmodeus was the goat that knew Diablo the best. And Asmodeus's memories and emotions flowed entirely into Shub-Niggurath. Diablo, the king of demons. Asmodeus had humiliatingly nodded his head to him in order to survive. Asmodeus desired intensely for Diablo to also become like her. Wait a little longer. Swoosh. Asmodeus, who had become a goat, stroked his fur as Shub-Niggurath whispered in a calm voice. He hasn't come yet. Rumble. A golden thunderbolt fell from the sky. In an instant, the world was bathed in gold, and the body of the goat that Shub-Niggurath was stroking was burned black. Crackle, crackle. Smoke rose from the goat's body like well-cooked meat. The goat, which had been staggering for a while, collapsed to the side. Oh my. Crackle, crackle. Shub-Niggurath shook his hand at the tingling sensation left on his fingertips. What a pity. Swoosh. Shub-Niggurath turned his head and saw a golden-haired man approaching him. The master of this thunderbolt. And perhaps the most threatening opponent on this battlefield. Shub-Niggurath's eyes widened as he looked at him. Yes, you've come too. I am Zeus. Crackle, crackle. Zeus was the first to reveal his name. What was this? Was he going to give his full name in the middle of this? Shub-Niggurath nodded his head, thinking it was fine. Shu-Niggurath. That's an unpronounceable word. Of course you haven't heard of it. It's a name you're not allowed to have. That's why I didn't want to reveal my name that much. Still, for some reason, he was intrigued. The momentum he felt from Zeus before him was higher than anyone else on this battlefield. Still, you, of all people, deserve to hear a different name. A different name? The black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. Zeus's eyes narrowed. It was a name he had heard before. There is a black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. It was what one had said when one of the goats that Shub-Niggurath was leading appeared on the first floor. A wall that could never be broken. A monster beyond that. It's one of my names. Carve it into your mind. One knew the name of that monster. The black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. Yes, that's right. Swoosh. Zeus's hand reached out. And at that moment, flash, rumble, as the halo filled Shub-Niggurath's vision, the bodies of the goats around her burned black. Crackle, crackle. How many is it now? I guess I need to change my name. Shub-Niggurath's eyebrows twitched slightly. A strike so fast it was invisible. The amount of mana released just by extending her palm was considerable. Snap, crackle, the amount of electricity emitted from Zeus' body was extraordinary. And with Zeus in the lead. Boom, a menacing fist slammed down on Shub-Niggurath's body. Screech, the ground turned upside down and rose to the sky. The body of a goat burst out and Shub-Niggurath, who had disappeared for a moment, reappeared from the mass of goat hair. Swish, the ground flipped and rose. Looking at the back of the giant man who created the sight with one punch, Shub-Niggurath felt threatened for the first time. This is a little dangerous. It was a fist that contained almost no mana. Nevertheless, the man's fist possessed the power to threaten even Shub-Niggurath's ontology. Giant Slayer Hercules. He had come with Zeus to challenge Shub-Niggurath head-on. In addition to that, Screech. Another one. There was another being that could threaten Shub-Niggurath. Boom. A pure white light pierced Shub-Niggurath's body and rose into the sky, illuminating the purple sky blue. A pillar of light that shot up high into the sky. At the appearance of the pillar, Susanoo muttered. Of course, he's not the kind of guy who would die so easily. A tone of voice that seemed to say he had expected it. Look, the pillar of light that opposes the spirit of Shub-Niggurath. And the giant spear that created the pillar, which rose to the end of the sky. As far as Susanoo knew, there were only 2 people in this tower who could throw a spear with such power. One was his master, Yuan, and the other was Odin. The king of Asgard. It was Odin. Boom. Inside the pillar of light created by Gungnir. In that pillar that had turned white and lost its color, the face of something non-human gradually appeared. Quote. So I had forgotten about you for a while. A giant goat. The goddess of abundance, who leads 1,000 goats. Odin. Shub-Niggurath's face. Chapter 436. Michael was the commander of the battlefield. It wasn't that the role was set up that way from the start. However, there was no one suitable to lead the rankers, so it was just a matter of being drawn by the atmosphere. Create a party with more than 10 people and adjust your position. The other ranks will divide their personnel and join the empty spaces. Don't distinguish between demons and angels. Right now, everyone is on the same side. Greed is forbidden. Those who are having a hard time, focus on maintaining your ranks. High rankers, form teams of 2n. He swung his sword relentlessly, scanned the battlefield without rest, and commanded the battlefield. Before he knew it, the battlefield was moving according to Michael's command. It was a moment when Michael's command ability, which had been honed through countless battles and the heavenly demon war, shone. However, I can't do it alone. No matter what, Michael couldn't use this large number of rankers in the right place and at the right time. Moreover, even if they joined forces, they wouldn't be enough. If they fought individually, they would only become food for the goats. It was impossible to control this vast battlefield with 1 mouth and 2 eyes. Actually, the ranks are collapsing. As the battle continued, they were gradually being pushed back by the goats. Advance the entire army. That was when, clack, clack. Along with orderly movements, rankers and players armed with solid armor joined the battlefield. This battle is not the celestial realms alone. Therefore, in this battle, prioritize protecting our allies rather than annihilating the enemy. A thick voice covered the battlefield. It was a voice that he couldn't ignore as a fellow commander. Is it Urangjingan? Urangjingan, a top-ranking high ranker who led the celestial realm along with Tushin. He was an outstanding warrior and a great general who commanded the celestial realm's battlefield. Clack. Urangjingan, who led the celestial realm's soldiers, approached Michael. He lightly placed his long, curved sword on one shoulder and complimented Michael's hard work. You were handling too much. You've done well. Right now, we need troops with ranks as disciplined as the celestial realm's soldiers. The problem with this battlefield was that there were too many guilds mixed together. Also, the free-spirited Mazoku and Diva, who were closer to a religion, did not have a command system like heaven. Naturally, the battlefield was bound to be chaotic. Thanks to the joining of the Allied forces, the battlefield was able to find some order. The Allied forces did not rush. He took the time to gather the soldiers of heaven and make them an army, not a guild. It was late, but it was an excellent choice in the current situation. That side is a complete mess. Kugugang, the place where the fight with Shub-Niggurath was in full swing. Odin, Zeus, Hercules, and Diablo fought as a team. Even Urangjingu, who had been through countless battlefields, had never thought that he would see such a scene in his life. Yes, it's not something you can just jump into with a half-hearted attitude. That side is that side, but this side is also important. Don't forget that your role is to command the Allied forces. I understand. Michael nodded at Urangjingu's words. Although their rankings were similar, Urangjingu was an ancient high ranker who had lived several times longer than Michael. It was natural for him to have respect for him as a fellow general. Pot. Michael spread his wings and disappeared into the wind. Even though he had taken a break with Urangjingu's help, it was still time for him to move busily. Chuck. Urangjingu couldn't just keep playing around either. Regardless of the command system, he needed a high ranker to deal with those damn goats. And on this chaotic battlefield, I wish I had that monkey here right now. A face came to Urangjingu's mind with longing. Swish! Hercules grabbed Shub-Niggurath's horn. The horn that had grown long enough to reach below his waist. It had become easier to hold with his hands as it grew larger. However, it's probably pretty heavy. Even with Hercules' strength, Shub-Niggurath's body was not easily lifted. Why on earth did this small body feel heavier than a mountain? It doesn't matter. Kugduk, Kugduk. Blood vessels swelled up and strength filled Hercules' arms. Gigantification is activated. Giant Slayer is activated. Gigantification is strengthened. Gigantification. And the highest ranking title that only Heracles has, the Giant Slayer. Added to the two powers, Terminator of Gigantomachia, is manifested. Boong, the body of Shub-Niggurath, caught in Heracles' fist, floated up. Hoop, just like when he lifted the Hydra from among Hera's 12 labors and nailed it to the ground. Heracles lifted Shub-Niggurath's body with all his might and threw it to the ground. Kwang, Kwang. Shub-Niggurath was deeply embedded in the ground. A huge crater with no end in sight was created. And into that crater. Get out of the way. Quirung, lightning bolts fell from the cloudy sky. Kwang, Kwa-rung, Kwa-rung. Kukunuking, the lightning bolts falling into the crater created a tall pillar of golden light. As Zeus rose into the sky, scattering lightning bolts, Odin appeared, bending his body. Get out of the way. Paji, Paji Gigi, Gingnir starts to turn on. If you make a mistake, you're likely to get caught up in it. If you insist a little, Gingnir will probably sweep even Zeus away. Kwang, with a loud noise, Gingnir started up again. It's already the second startup. Gingnir's pure white spearhead covered the golden pillar. Kwau, it created a pillar of light that was even taller and endless. A promise made in advance. Heracles, who had hurriedly distanced himself to avoid Gingnir's range and climbed into the same cloud as Zeus, realized anew. They say Odin's Gingnir pierces the tower. He was absolutely confident in his strength and toughness. In particular, Heracles had experienced the end of Gigantomachia in this trial and gained his divine status according to mythology, so his toughness had increased by several levels. Nevertheless, Heracles was not confident that he would be safe even if he received a spear of such power with his body. Truly a devastating blow. The dozens and hundreds of lightning bolts that Zeus fired seemed small and shabby. However, Juwaak, Pipiok, nevertheless, Shub-Niggurath did not die. It was expected. If it was an opponent who could die to this extent, Odin and Zeus probably wouldn't have been so wary. Clack, clack, a giant black spike that had just barely been blocked by the outstretched hand. A horn, it was a horn with the same shape as the one on Shub-Niggurath's head. The only difference was that this one was so long that it seemed like it could pierce through the tower. It was incredibly powerful. If the force used to block it had been even a little weaker, the shoulder would have been pierced. Heracles glanced at the horns that had sprouted out of the hole where Gingnir had fallen. And then at the cloud where Odin and Zeus were. Crack, crackle. Zeus reached out his hand and created a barrier of lightning. The horn that had reached almost to the tip of his nose stopped just a hand's width away, unable to pierce through Zeus's head. The way Odin blocked the horn wasn't much different from Heracles. He had cast a spell that strengthened his grip, and he used his brute strength to block the horn. And in front of the two of them. Well done, screech. The tip of the horn that had stopped in front of Zeus. Above it, Shub-Niggurath revealed herself once more. All three of you, even if your teamwork isn't that great, each and every one of you has great potential. Shub-Niggurath's voice echoed in their heads. Odin covered his head with one hand. He had activated Gingnir twice in a short amount of time, and his magical power was rapidly reaching its end. It seems like one of you still relies too much on weapons. Shub-Niggurath's face was badly damaged, with her eyes and nose gone. It wasn't just her face. There wasn't a single place that looked holy. One of her arms was completely gone, and the other one looked like it was about to fall off. In spite of all that, Zeus was surprised. Because she still hadn't revealed her true form. So, I think I can ignore that one for now. Rumble. A black background spread around Zeus, who was making eye contact with Shub-Niggurath. I'm going to have to lock you up for a bit. Everything around them changed. The scenery, the air, and even the magical power that made up the world. Zeus looked around the new space he had been placed in. A black sky and ground. And a forest filled with trees that looked like they had been charred by lightning. The one with 1,000 young. Step. As he walked through the forest, Zeus recalled another name for Shub-Niggurath. The Black Goat of the Woods. It seemed that this was the Black Forest. Why had he come here? Creak. His head shook. Feeling as though the string holding onto his consciousness was about to snap, Zeus quickened his pace. Ba, 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 the cries of goats echoed through the black forest. Hearing the cries, Zeus recalled the goats that had turned into black ash in his hand. They were made here, Shub-Niggurath with 1,000 young. And this forest was like a home to those goats. Shub-Niggurath had invited Zeus to the black forest. You want to lock me up? Crackle, crackle, a golden current flowed out of Zeus' body, illuminating the black forest. The cries of the goats grew louder. The lightning that appeared in the forest that had never seen light was a strange threat to them. But Zeus ignored the cries of the goats. If that's the case, you've come to the wrong place. Crackle, crackle, rumble, a disaster struck the sky of the black forest. Since you've invited me to your home, the sky covered with black clouds began to thunder and lighten. Following the gesture of Zeus' hand reaching high into the sky, the lightning in the clouds writhed and took the form of a thunder dragon. I'll burn it all down. There was only one way to escape this forest. Burn down the entire forest, forcing Shub-Niggurath to let him out again. And he had enough power to do so. Rumble, just as Zeus was about to unleash the thunder dragon over the black forest. Thud, someone was seen walking out of the forest made of black trees. Crackle, sizzle, Zeus' magical power shook with disturbance. He had tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a goat, but he couldn't when he saw the face of the being that appeared. He looked at Zeus and asked, "Why are you here?" Those were the words that Zeus wanted to ask the most. Why are you here? Kim Yu-1, Chapter 437. Okay, then what should I do? Why are you here? Zeus asked the same thing. The two of them were thinking the same thing. Why was the other person here? I lost the kid. The kid, yeah, that's why I was looking for him. It was hard to understand even after hearing the reason. Zeus frowned, twitching one eyebrow as if to ask what that was supposed to mean. Why are you here? That goat bastard called me here. Shu-Ni-Ji-Yu, Raph. You seem to know that guy's name pretty well. Of course, it didn't seem like he would answer if I asked how he knew all that. There were very few people who knew anything about Yu-1. Odin seemed to know something, but it was difficult to get Odin, of all people, to open his mouth. Furthermore, Yu-1 and Zeus were still far from being friends or comrades. They simply had the same goal. In the first place, the two of them had been enemies who tried to kill each other. Anyway, that's why I was about to burn this whole forest down. Not a bad idea, but hold on for a bit. Why? Because there's a better way. There is a way, huh? It's not an easy method. But if it succeeds, we'll be able to give that goat bastard a good blow. Blaze. Yuan's eyes turned red. The problem is outside where you were. Past where Zeus had come from in the forest. The fight with Shub-Niggurath was still going on. Shub-Niggurath hadn't revealed her main body yet, but either way, she couldn't afford to lose too much power here. Fortunately, that side will be fine. What do you mean? Because Heracles is there. Quote. Yu-1 made a puzzled expression as if to ask what he was talking about. Heracles. He was definitely great. He was one of the high rankers Yu-1 acknowledged the most, along with Sun Ogong and Odin. But this time, his opponent was bad. The fight with Shub-Niggurath wasn't one that Heracles could solve on his own. Zeus must have known that as well. Zeus, explanation continued as Yu-1 looked at him. Heracles is a kid who is close to the perfected form that I planned. I know, thanks to that guy was able to during the Gigantomachia. No, you don't know. Zeus shook his head firmly. That kid isn't perfect yet. His words were mixed with a meaningful laugh. Even Yuan, who thought he knew everything about Heracles, couldn't understand these words. Heracles wasn't perfect. Did that mean there was more left even after he had obtained godhood? But Zeus didn't give any further explanation, as if to get revenge on Yu-1 for always giving vague explanations, and instead just increased his curiosity. Well, anyway, you don't have to worry too much about that side. He'll probably be okay for now. If that's the case, then let's hurry on this side. Then let's hurry this way anyway. Black horns rose from the ground. That's it. What should I do then? Paget, Pajiji. As if asking to say anything, Zeus drew up his magic power as if he would emit a thunderbolt at any moment. However, Danfang Yu-1 raised his voice and shouted. Me, only the bleating of goats returned. Paget, Zeus, who had been drawing up his thunderbolt with interest until just a moment ago, looked at Yu-1 with a puzzled face. Yu-1, who had called out, Danfang once again, looked back at Zeus. What are you doing? Why aren't you following me? What's going on right now? Danfang Pung. Yu-Won's voice echoed back. And so Yu-Won walked into the dark forest in search of Dan-Ah. And behind such Yu-Won. Da, Pipajik. Zeus forced the words out, putting strength into his forehead. Danfang Ah. Boang, Kwang, Heracles, fist struck Shub-Niggurath's body. Even for a moment, Shub-Niggurath's body staggered from the force that could crush even a mountain. Heracles, who swung the club he held in his other hand without stopping, asked. Where did you send him? You seem to care a lot. Answer me, Georong. The club made from the shaved Yggdrasil smashed Shub-Niggurath's head. It seemed as if it would be crushed as it was, but Shub-Niggurath's head split in half. Father and son, a tragic relationship. They pretend to be strong on the outside, but the wounds in their hearts are deep. Like a poor little boy. Two goats with devil's horns stared at Heracles from the left and right with their purple eyes sparkling. A chilling horror. Heracles shook it off and drew out the power of Gigantomachia. Shut up, Wang, Wang. I told you to answer. Jiweorong, Tu Wa-ak. The club struck the two goats. The force that had been drawn up explosively in an instant brought down not only Shub-Niggurath, but also the ground where Heracles was standing. And the next moment, protect Heracles, deal with the main body. The rankers who had cleared a path through the goats followed Heracles. Leading them was not Diablo, but Behemoth, the high ranker who led the Demon King instead. The rankers who rushed in. It was strange, he was definitely not someone who could be pushed so easily, but he had already pushed back the goats and the support of his allies had arrived. Gugu, Gu. It was then that the ground where Shub-Niggurath was embedded began to shake. Excellent, Shub-Niggurath's voice rang out. It was an ominous sign. Heracles' gaze turned to the allied rankers who had begun to join him at the back. No, still unaware of anything, they were approaching Heracles. And the next moment, Quajadad, clank. Despite his body covered in bruises and blood, Heracles' fighting spirit had not diminished in the slightest. Black horns rose from the ground. Pupik. The horns pierced sharply, as if they would penetrate his body. The power of the giant dwells in your arms. Uduk, Udk. Heracles, magical arms crossed. He crossed his arms to cover his vitals and protect his body from the horns. He didn't need a shield. Heracles' body was a stronger shield than any item in this tower. Puck, Puaic. However, Heracles' body could not block all the horns that rose from the ground. Some of the horns pierced his hard body, and Heracles was sent flying into the sky. He felt pain in his body. Even if his body was not pierced, his whole body felt bruised as if he had been hit by the horns. Heracles' vision was filled with black horns. A forest of black horns spread across the battlefield. And the forest did not cover Heracles alone. What about the others? His gaze turned to the rankers who had been running towards him. Heracles' eyes shook violently. Oh, damn, the battlefield was in ruins. The corpses of the rankers were scattered around Heracles. This time, nearly 1,000 rankers had died. And the rankers who barely survived. Thanks to the magic created by Mimir and Odin, they were barely able to float into the sky and escape beyond the range of Shub-Niggurath's attacks. Were alive. I almost died. This is a completely different level. Rankers who had inadvertently gotten involved in the fight. And Behemoth, the high ranker on the Demon King's side who commanded them. He stuttered, his face pale with exhaustion. Monster. Some of the rankers had thought of this fight as an opportunity to raise their rank. If they could only make a contribution in the fight against the goats and against Shub-Niggurath, their main body, their rise in rank would be as good as guaranteed. But now they finally realized. Thud, Shub-Niggurath walked out from among the forest of black horns. She was a being of a different dimension from them. Half of you survived. Shub-Niggurath looked up at the rankers who had escaped to the magic circle. Odin and Mimir had saved them. She felt like applauding them for saving such a large number in such a short time. Odin, who had thrown Tugingnurs and fought Shub-Niggurath head-on, was the most exhausted of the group. He would probably need to rest quite a bit before he could fight like that again. The problem was still over there. Thud, Heracles reappeared in front of Shub-Niggurath. Despite the bruises and bloodstains all over his body, Heracles' fighting spirit had not diminished in the slightest. Tenacious. Shub-Niggurath's eyes turned, even after seeing this. In her pupils were reflected the corpses of the rankers who had died on the spot. Heracles also realized what Shub-Niggurath was talking about and nodded his head. Yeah, Kwang. Strength entered the fist that gripped the club. Thanks to that, I've made up my mind. Determination. As if to ask what she meant, Shub-Niggurath's head, half human and half goat, tilted. And in such a response from Shub-Niggurath, Heracles realized that she was not fully aware of his intentions. I wasn't hesitant from the beginning. Swoosh, Heracles turned his head. The battlefield was in shambles. Rankers still fighting the satyrs and those who had already died. Shub-Niggurath was not an opponent that could be fought in this way from the beginning. Gulp, gulp, strength of the giant dwells in your arm. Giant Slayer, dwells in your body. Strength of the 12 labors, dwells in your arm. Ender of the Gigantomachy, dwells in your body. Heracles, body swelled as the powers of magic, title, and divinity dwelled within him. Indeed, Shub-Niggurath was quite impressed. In terms of rank, you are not inferior to your father. Greed filled Shub-Niggurath's eyes. It was the same kind of gaze one would have when looking at an attractive member of the opposite sex. She felt the rank emanating from Heracles' body and imagined the moment when she would make him her own. Wonderful, pure admiration. However, Heracles was not interested in such admiration from Shub-Niggurath. Crack, a golden thunderbolt flowed out of Heracles' fist. It was a completely different kind of power from the other powers that had focused on strengthening his body. At first, it was somewhat unnatural. After all, Heracles had never handled any kind of magic related to attributes. However, crackle, crackle, the golden thunderbolt that began to flow from Heracles' fist gradually began to build up a certain concentration and form. This is, Shub-Niggurath showed curiosity at the magic that began to flow out of Heracles' body. Although still very lacking, that power was clearly that guy's power, the guy she had locked up in the Black Forest. Zeus, the power of the thunderbolt he wielded could also be felt from Heracles' body. Quack, Heracles clenched his fist, he raised his head and looked up at the sky. Far away, above the clouds, he could feel a gaze looking down on him. It had taken him quite some time to make up his mind. Quirang, power of lightning, dwells in your arm. The hero was ultimately completed. Chapter 438. Lightning is activated. It had come loose from Zeus. And inside him, ever since he was born, there was the power of lightning. Underneath the golden eyes, he could see the chaotic battlefield. And in the center, Shub-Niggurath and Heracles. You took your time. He said it took a long time, but it felt like the opposite. Had time ever passed by so quickly? The tension had lasted so long, time had passed naturally. Keep this in mind. Zeus's voice brushed past his head. The moment you move the seed, if your concentration wavers, your life will be in danger. Chuck, Chuck, Hargan looked down at his body. An explosive electric shock that he had never felt before enveloped his body and passed by. At that moment, Hargan had only one impression. It doesn't hurt as much as I thought. The power of lightning is concentrated in your arm. Kwa rang, Kwang. Looking down at his arm, wrapped in golden lightning, Heracles thought. You were originally one. It was what Zeus had said when he called Heracles and Hargan together. No, to be exact, you were planned to be one. Creating a child through planning, aren't you ashamed? It's certainly not honorable. However, I did not call you here to argue about right and wrong. Right now, that's, Heracles, who was about to vent his anger, soon stopped and closed his mouth. Certainly, the current situation was not leisurely enough to waste time arguing about right and wrong. So, what does it mean that you were one? I wanted a perfect successor who would surpass me. The ideal being who would raise Olympus higher and stand tall at the top of the tower. Zeus looked at Heracles and Hargan in turn and asked. What about you two? Do you have any thoughts of becoming king? No, yes. Heracles and Hargan's answers diverged. And at the answers of the two, Zeus regretfully closed his eyes for a moment. I see. Now, tell me. Yes, yes. The words continued with difficulty. As I watched my many children, I realized that I had to give up my greed. Greed. If the vessel is too strong, the seed cannot grow, and if the vessel is weak, the seed will not be able to use all its strength even if it grows. What does that mean? Swish. Hercules grabbed Zeus by the collar. Staring at Zeus with furious eyes, he asked in an unusually growling voice. The two of us, are you talking about that bowl? Huh, only then did Hargan realize what Zeus meant by the bowl and the seed. The bowl that holds the seed, Hercules. And the bowl where the seed will grow, Hargan. That was the role of the two of them. Yes, how can you say that so easily? Easy or difficult, I have to say what I have to say. Especially in a situation like this. Thud, Hercules let go of his hand, which he had been holding roughly. Zeus continued, brushing off his disheveled clothes. The seed has grown enough. The thunderbolt in Hargan's body is already ripe enough. Now it's time to move the ground. Are you telling me to take this guy's thing right now? Yes, that's what I'm saying. You haven't changed a bit. Zeus raised his head at Hercules, sharp remark. Purple sky. Under the sky of Shub-Niggurath, he opened his mouth. What was supposed to happen has happened. It was a voice devoid of confidence, unlike usual. This was the first time Hercules had seen Zeus like this. Zeus made him feel the desperation of the situation deep in his bones with just one word. Hercules sighed and asked, "Is there no other way?" Zeus nodded at Hercules, question. "At least not for me." Ha, it meant that the way was with Hercules and Hargan. So as Hercules glanced at Hargan next to him, "I will do it." Hargan nodded and made up his mind. Crackle, crackle. Hercules clenched his fist at the power of the thunderbolt that filled his body. It was something he had learned just a few hours ago. That he was originally made to be a vessel to hold the thunderbolt. It didn't feel real when he said it. But, I guess I understand why he said that. He felt like the distance between him and Zeus, which he thought had gotten a little closer because of this incident, had grown a little further apart again. It seems that it is finally complete. Crash, rumble. Shub-Niggurath opened his mouth at the flow of electricity bursting from Hercules' hand. Really tempting. I still don't feel it. Crackle. Hercules appeared behind Shub-Niggurath. What does it mean that I'm complete? He punched Shub-Niggurath in the back. Whoosh, crash. Golden lightning swept over Shub-Niggurath as the fists collided. Shub-Niggurath staggered inside, caught in the tingling electricity along with the impact of the fist. In the midst of the golden halo that would not easily go out. Swish, pot. Wu Wan, who was walking, stopped abruptly. Hercules, who had blown Shub-Niggurath away, followed him and swung his fist again. Quang, the sound of thunder erupted from the ground. The fist, filled with the power of an attribute, unleashed several times the power of a fist filled with mere strength. Shub-Niggurath's body was torn apart and exploded. Hercules, sudden transformation. What the hell is that guy? He watched the sight from afar, his mouth agape. Even though he was under the curse of knowledge. Right now, even he couldn't easily understand Hercules' appearance. Naturally, Mimir had no choice but to turn his gaze to Odin. What on earth had happened to Hercules during the 100 years he had been asleep? I hear it's a lot different. Odin found it difficult to explain as well. Hercules was definitely a great ranker. He was the hero of the Gigantomachy and the best of Zeus' children. But even so, it wasn't to this extent. From his first appearance, he was unusual. He, who hadn't even been in the top 10, faced Shub-Niggurath head-on with just his strength. It wasn't easy for Odin either. But now, he had gone beyond that, wielding lightning like Zeus and cornering Shub-Niggurath. Odin spread his palms and brought them to his eyes. For some reason, the wrinkles on his palms seemed to have increased today. It's been a long time. How long had he been at the top? It was impossible to reign over the world forever under the name of king. Perhaps it was when Zeus, the young boy, first ruled Olympus and called himself king. He realized that his time would come to an end as time passed. And seeing the sight before him, Odin was finally convinced. Times have changed. Maple, Maple, ah. Wu Wan turned her head at the feeble voice. Zeus, who was following her, sighed rarely and shook his head. Why are you doing this? It's only been 10 minutes. It's been 10 minutes. The two searched for Maple, raising their voices. It was natural for Wu Wan to look for the lost Maple, but Zeus couldn't help but feel impatient. But so what? If you can't even stand that, do it yourself. Maple. Wu Wan, who went deeper into the forest again, looking for Maple. Pock, a vein popped out on Zeus' forehead. With a rare look of irritation on his face, Zeus strode towards Wu Wan. Do you even know where the hell that guy is, and are you taking it easy? Wasn't it you, not me, who was worried about the outside just now? It was. Then why, Tuck, walking, Yuan stopped all of a sudden. Did she find something? Yuan stood there silently for a moment before replying a beat late. It's not that far. What? Zeus turned his head. The dark forest. The black forest of Shub-Niggurath seemed to get darker the deeper you went. What the hell is around here? Where? Follow me. Yuan strode forward. It was a different movement than before, when she was just following the path. Steps that felt certain. Thud. Zeus followed behind Yuan. If she had found the guy she was looking for, he had to hurry, so he thought to himself as he timed it. How long had they walked like that? Bah! The bleating of a goat was heard. It's close. Bah! 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 The bleating of goats wasn't just one. Zeus, who had already met Shub-Niggurath's goats twice, couldn't just ignore them. Furthermore, the bleating was getting louder in the direction Yuan was headed. Crackle. Zeus slightly increased his electrokinesis. At this distance, the goats could rush in and overwhelm them at any moment. Are we going the right way? It was an obvious question. Even though they were rushing to escape, they were now entering the enemy's territory on their own. Furthermore, why the hell was that thing called Maple in the middle of those goats? Yes, it doesn't sound like it. No, Yuan shook her head. It's more certain because of the sound. What are you talking about? Meaningless words continued. Anyway, there was no way but to follow Yuan for now. The place they followed her to was no different. Bah! Bah! Dozens. No, hundreds of goats were gathered in a line. Of course. Crack, crackle, as if he had expected it, Zeus reached out his hand and created lightning in his hand. Since they were gathered together, he planned to wipe out the goats at once. However, stop, you know this is an opportunity, right? Zeus frowned at Yuan, who was blocking his way as if telling him not to interfere. If those guys scattered in all directions, it would definitely be a big headache. However, look over there. Yuan pointed to the middle of the goats. Zeus wondered what was there, and without erasing the lightning in his hand, he looked in the direction Yuan's finger was pointing. And that moment, is that what you were looking for? Zeus once again doubted the existence of Maple, who Yuan kept shouting and looking for. In the middle of the huddled goats. Creak, groan. An egg that was badly cracked was shaking dangerously, as if it would break at any moment. Chapter 439. Ma, ma, me, the goats cried out noisily. Even though Yuan and Zeus had clearly approached to within a short distance, the goats didn't even turn their heads. The goats' gazes were all directed at the egg, as if they were waiting for it to hatch. You mean to tell me that Dana is just an egg that you can sacrifice and eat? He scoffed, asking if she had searched so diligently for just that. But instead of being offended by Zeus's reaction, Yuan asked him worriedly. Are you okay? What are you talking about? If that guy heard what you just said, he'd get really mad. Even if something hatched out of that egg. Zeus's eyebrow, which had been raised as he spoke, twitched irregularly for a moment. He had dismissed it as something too insignificant to notice, but it was definitely the egg that Yuan had been searching for. Yuan knew more about Shub-Niggurath than anyone else. If Yuan was using his precious time to come here, there had to be a reason. It's definitely strange. Zeus put away his prejudices and looked at the scene in front of him again. It doesn't seem to be a threat. They're gathering around and surrounding it, as if. There was only one way to describe the sight. They're revering it as if it's something important. He didn't feel any sense of incongruity when he imagined Shub-Niggurath in place of the egg. It didn't seem to be an ordinary egg. Perhaps the existence that would hatch from it could be the key to winning this fight. Of course, that was only if the egg hatched and the being inside grew enough. So it was natural for Zeus to feel impatient. So, are you saying that we should just stand here and watch? Yes. Until when? Crack. That was when the sound of bones breaking and crushing was heard. Zeus, who had been talking to Yuan, turned his head. Me, ma, the goats cried out, but their cries were different from before. Instead of hostility, they were filled with respect and awe. The goats, which had been gathered around the egg as if they were revering it, were now turning around and running away in fear and betrayal. SS is SS. Purple smoke poured out of the egg. It stretched out towards the nearby goats, tightly binding their bodies. Crackle. It was the same sound that had been heard earlier. The sound of bones breaking and crushing. Zeus thought it was the sound created by some strong force. But, crack, that wasn't it. I don't know what I'm seeing right now. Clang. The moment the smoke enveloped them, the goats' fur, skin, and bones crumbled and withered away. Even though its true form had yet to be revealed, Zeus felt threatened by the egg that had yet to hatch. What on earth was going to come out of it? I guess I avoided the fox only to meet the tiger. Crackle, rumble, lightning danced in Zeus's hands. He ignored the goats fleeing from the egg and aimed his lightning at the smoke. But, SS is SS. The smoke that had been devouring the goats changed its movement. Up until just now, the smoke had seemed like it would devour everything around it, but at some point, it stopped spreading outward and seeped back into the egg. And that moment was clearly. Crunch, when Yuan passed the goats and approached the egg. Are you still sleeping? There was no answer. Zeus dispelled the lightning he had created in his hand. It was because he had confirmed that the egg was at least friendly towards Yuan. Zeus followed behind Yuan as he walked toward the egg. During that short time, the smoke coming from the egg had consumed almost 100 goats. Past the withered corpses of the goats. Is this that Dana chick? The place where Yuan had approached. The egg was wriggling. Zeus instinctively tightened his grip on his sword in response to the egg's reaction. Look at this sight right now. The existence inside was eating goats that even the high rankers found difficult to deal with. It was fortunate that it could distinguish between friend and foe. Haven't you eaten enough? Crack. In response to Yuan's words, the egg slowly quickened its hatching process. It was still a slow pace. And Zeus wasn't the only one who was impatient. 1. Crack, clack, the egg was growing rapidly. 2. Just count to 3, screech. Thinking so, Yuan pulled out his sword from his waist. If it was going to take this long, he was going to break the egg open and hatch it. And in response to Yuan's reaction, crack, clack, clack. As if it had finished preparing to hatch, the egg slowly began to break out of its shell. Inside the egg that had hatched. Thud, thud, plump feet stepped out. Ah boo, a kid, it was about knee-high. Its arms and legs were small, and its head was large. Its skin was so white and pure that it looked like a doll. Zeus was instantly irritated by its cute and plump appearance, which looked like a 4-year-old. Did he have to go through all this trouble because of this little kid? Ah bah, ah bah. Dana opened her arms wide towards Yuan. She was still a kid who couldn't walk properly, but Yuan smiled warmly at Dana's appearance. Why did it take so long? Dana had grown up and eventually became an egg. Yuan thought that the egg would naturally hatch after some time. But that wasn't it. Yuan's gaze turned to the corpses of the goats scattered around. Was it still hungry? The dead goats. They had all been drained of their energy by Dana, leaving them withered like mummies. Predators ate the flesh of other creatures and increased Dana's level and growth rate through their energy. Dana, who had filled her stomach through them, had hatched like this. As he wished, Yuan hugged Dana and put her on his shoulder. She was quite heavy. The creature that had been the size of his palm had grown quite a bit after hatching from the egg. Are you full? Yup. Her speech was a little awkward, but she answered properly. It was a little heartwarming to see the creature who had only babbled like a newborn baby now grown this big. On the other hand, is this kid the one you were looking for? Zeus seemed somewhat dissatisfied. Yes, we wasted our time for nothing. Even though he had shouted, Dana, and searched for her, he didn't feel any special power from the little girl named Dana in front of him. Seriously, we wasted our time. Zeus's mind was filled with the image of Shub-Niggurath. Not only the form he had been fighting just now, but also the main body of Shub-Niggurath that had appeared on the first floor. Would that little kid be able to fight that thing? No, well, he didn't know if there was some kind of secret, but Zeus didn't think so. However, you might think so. Yuan was different. He could see what Zeus couldn't see. And he could feel what he couldn't feel. He was certain, his choice wasn't wrong. Don't try to persuade me anymore. If you want to explain the value of that creature, show me with results, not words. I will. Ka-ga-gak. The sword was drawn from Yuan's waist. Then, first of all, let's get out of here. That's what I wanted to say. Only then did the corners of Zeus's lips go up. The moment he stretched out his hand upward. Kwang, as if he would hesitate no longer. Zeus began to scatter lightning towards the black forest. Ku-gi-u-gi-u-gi-u. It had been only about 3 minutes. During that time, the battlefield was completely transformed by Hercules, who had run like crazy. Dozens of bottomless pits in the ground where golden lightning swirled. And in the middle of it, the crumpled body of Shub-Niggurath. Phew, phew, Hercules was the one who was confident that no one would beat him in terms of physical strength. But he was this tired in just 3 minutes. Flicker, crackle. Lightning still flowed uncontrollably through his arms. It was as if it was screaming for him to run more. The lightning in Hercules's body was escaping Hercules's will to control it. Lightning's power is in your arms. You cannot control the power of lightning. You cannot control the power of lightning. A repetitive message. He could feel the magic power in his body draining away. The uncontrolled power of lightning released excessive power even if he tried to raise it a little, and if he got a little excited, it scattered easily like grains of sand held in his hand. So Hercules released lightning with all his might. If he hadn't, it would have been difficult to inflict proper damage on Shub-Niggurath. Quack. While taking a short break, he clenched and unclenched his fists to organize his strength. Even if he stood still and concentrated like this, the lightning did not follow Hercules's will. It's difficult, quite a lot. Hercules had fought with his bare body all his life. Even if it was a fight using magic power and skills, he only used magic power to strengthen his body or to use gigantification. He had never used techniques such as changing the attribute of magic power. It was because he had no talent in that direction. He had thought about why. It wasn't that he didn't have the talent for magic power, and as a player, he had more than enough talent. But that was the reason he was a vessel to plant lightning. Why are you spacing out? Was it because he had caught his breath a little? Odin approached Hercules. He was holding Gungnir in his hand, as if preparing for his next move. It's still awkward. It seems like a new power. Yes, it won't be easy to handle. But if you can handle it. Odin laughed and uttered words that would have made anyone listening fall over in surprise. Maybe this place could be yours. Odin, ranked second, the greatest being known in this tower except for the first place who had not been active for over 10,000 years. He was saying that he could give up his place to someone. Hercules's performance was that great. However, thanks to this, I'll be able to see that bastard's face properly. The fight with Shub-Niggurath was not over yet. Face. Come to think of it, you haven't seen it. What do you mean? The guy the first saw on the first floor. Quack. Odin's grip on Gungnir tightened. Quote. It wasn't this easy. Hercules looked at the scenery he had created. The land was so ruined that it seemed like the end of the world was coming today. It was all the shocks he had created. But it was easy. Is that what it means? And that's when it happened. As the sky of this world was covered in purple, the sound of crying could be heard. Chapter 440. The empty conference room. The space that had been filled with chatter was now deathly quiet, not even a whisper could be heard. A strange atmosphere filled the room. It was then that the sound of footsteps echoed through the conference room that felt like it was devoid of even air. Thud, slow and heavy footsteps. The black-haired man who had been walking softly on the floor opened his drowsy eyes. How dull. Vishnu with black hair and green eyes. He blinked his eyes slowly a few times as if he was about to fall asleep. He wanted to just collapse with his tired body. The process of becoming one brought a lot of fatigue. That was when the sound of crying was heard. The crying sound that permeated the heart of Valhalla, and the unknown presence contained within it. Along with the crying sound, the figure of a huge black goat appeared before Vishnu's eyes. He could roughly guess what kind of being it was just from the crying sound. Vishnu covered his ears. It wasn't just that was ringing loudly in his head. I got it. I understand. Vishnu replied to the words of an unknown person and began to walk with a look of annoyance. Footsteps heading outside the conference room. The moment he crossed the door, Vishnu's figure disappeared without a trace. Thud, thud, thud. The rankers who were fighting the mountain goats lost consciousness one by one and collapsed. They were those who lacked mental strength or those who were exhausted from the long battle. Hey, pull yourself together. If you suddenly collapse. Damn it, can someone come here and fill in the position? The situation on the battlefield changed once again with the sound of crying. The rankers who had barely managed to push back the mountain goats with the addition of the allied forces of Iran were shaken again. There was no proper way to fill that spot. In the end, the allied forces of Iran stepped forward. Kwang, Orangutan jumped into the middle of the battlefield, wielding his heavy blade in one hand. The mountain goats headed towards such Orangutan. Orangutan swung his blade at the mountain goats rushing in from three directions. Quagagak, mountain goats with their stomachs cut open and flying away. However, there was one in a direction he hadn't seen. I guess I have to give up my shoulder. Kwang. Instead of dodging, Orangutan put more strength into the hand holding the blade. He decided that it would be better to trust his armor and tough body, give up his shoulder, and deliver a sure blow rather than trying to dodge awkwardly. Just as Orangutan was about to give up his shoulder and swing his blade. Swaik. A red line was drawn over the body of the mountain goat that was charging towards Orangutan. Puwak. Jeek. The body of the mountain goat was cut into dozens of pieces, and a small cut appeared on Orangutan's cheek. The sharp sword that had pierced the body of the mountain goat had also affected Orangutan. This swordsmanship is familiar. Perhaps none of the warriors of heaven would not remember this swordsmanship. Even though it had been over 100 years. Asura. The ghost in front of him was an enemy who had challenged heaven and defeated the warriors of heaven one by one. Thud, thud, the flesh of the cut mountain goat fell to the ground. Asura looked around with his four swords hanging down. He didn't seem to be interested in Orangutan. It meant that there were many strong enemies on this battlefield. If I had made a mistake, my neck would have been cut off too. No need to thank me. If you're going to say that you're thankful, it's a bit creepy. Whatever. Why are you so late? I had a lot of enemies. At those words, Orangutan looked at Asura's attire. His body was covered in the blood of humans, not mountain goats. It seemed that he had come from a battle somewhere. That hothead is still the same. For Asura, there was no distinction between friend and foe. He risked his life to fight the strong, and he always forced his opponents to fight. How many grudges had been created that way? Among the guilds that had joined this alliance, there were several that held grudges against Asura. When he had invaded the heavens, if it hadn't been for the mediation of the allied forces, Asura and the heavens might have become enemies. Still, thanks to that, I was able to catch my breath. The thought that they could fill the void left by the rankers who had just fallen with Asura's help was short-lived. Along with the sound of the horn that made his head ring again, Oranjingu dropped the moon sword he was holding to the ground. What the hell is that? Swish, swish, the color of the ground changed. The ground, which had been stained with the blood of the rankers, turned black. The seeds that had been fertilized by their blood grew into small trees, which soon grew into giant trees. A vast forest spread out. In it, the goats bleated repeatedly, their eyes glinting. The bleating of Shub-Niggurath. When Heracles heard it, he felt as if vomit was rising from his stomach. Heracles, expression crumpled, you seem very tired. Odin patted Heracles on the shoulder. Rest for a while, you still need to get used to that power. I can't do that. Thud, Heracles pushed Odin's hand away. Didn't you say that this was the beginning? You're as stubborn as your father. Don't compare me to him. With a sharp retort, Heracles began to walk in the direction of Shub-Niggurath's bleating. But soon, stagger, as if he had lost his balance, Heracles stumbled. That's what I was talking about. I told you to rest for a bit. I'm fine, tisk. Odin clicked his tongue and looked at the forest in front of him. The Black Forest. It was a place that perfectly matched the name of Shub-Niggurath, who was known as the Black Goat of the Woods with 1,000 young. In this short amount of time, a forest had spread out that was large enough to cover an entire country. The trees that covered the forest gave off an ominous aura. The trees are, along with the continued bleating. Rumble, a giant goat emerged from the Black Forest. Thud, it was a being of a different dimension. Only then did Heracles realize why his body had suddenly lost its strength. It was partly because his energy had been depleted from using lightning for the first time in his life. Is it because of that goat? A giant goat with purple eyes. It was because he felt an instinctive fear towards that being. Thud, Odin walked towards Shub-Niggurath. Heracles watched Odin, who was heading towards Shub-Niggurath alone just like he had done a moment ago, and reached out. You can't. Swish. Heracles grabbed Odin's leg and shook his head. He was just as exhausted. It was no good trying to do anything by himself right now. What are you going to do alone? You were alone too. You and I am Odin. Heracles, words that, they were different, could not continue. As if he had expected Heracles to say that, Odin said with a chuckle. The king of Asgard, the great sky that rules over the 5 worlds. Whatever anyone said, Asgard was the guild that ruled over the largest world in this tower. And Odin was the ranker who had founded such Asgard. To someone, it might be arrogance, but the moment he uttered those words, it became pride and self-confidence. And because he knew that, Heracles could no longer dissuade Odin. Besides, it's a useless worry, a closer friend to Odin than anyone else. Even Mimir came to Heracles, sighed and tried to dissuade him. Clank, clank, Hercules could no longer stop Odin, who was approaching Shub-Niggurath. I need to recover as soon as possible. He was confident that no one could beat him in terms of stamina. Hercules was determined to quickly recover his stamina and join Odin. And such intentions of Hercules were clearly revealed in the expression on his face. TCH, you don't have to be that impatient. Mimir shook his head at Hercules' expression. Hercules couldn't understand. The opponent was Shub-Niggurath. Furthermore, it showed off its main body and showed off its presence, which was even higher. Meanwhile, Odin, I can only throw Gungnir about 1 step. He took a short breath, but he had already fired Gungnir, which was 2 steps away. It was a fact that could be seen just by looking at his back that he was very tired. Even to activate Gungnir, I need to buy some time. Is that all that guy has, Gungnir? That's not it, but that guy's ranking is not just something he grabbed. Mimir knew more about Odin than anyone else. They climbed the tower together, raised their ranks, and built Asgard on this tower. The two who had reached the top together knew each other better than anyone else. Odin was Mimir, and Mimir was Odin. Your magic is inferior to mine, and your physical abilities are inferior to yours. And the Odin that Mimir knew was not such a great being to be admired. I don't know if it's been over 10,000 years since I climbed the tower. Until then, he was far from being called a king. But that guy was great. Do you know why? A question that shouldn't be known. It was then that a cool feeling was transmitted to Hercules' skin, waiting for the answer that would follow. Swoosh. The smell of wood. The smell permeating in the brilliant air that seemed to open up his nose was definitely the smell of a living tree. It was a familiar smell to him, who had been stuck in the mountains and cutting down trees ever since the gigantomachia ended. Hercules looked around. I wondered where the smell was coming from. However, all that was around were dead trees in the black forest created by Shub-Niggurath. I couldn't see such a cool tree even if I washed my eyes and looked for it. As many ignorant people do, Odin is truly great because he is qualified to activate Gingnir. Mimir snorted as he said so. No, that's just one of the many great things about that guy. What are you trying to say? Look at that, chin. Odin, who was walking towards Shub-Niggurath, leaned on a pillar of a black dead tree. And that moment, shish, color was added to the pillar of the blackened tree. A pillar of brown wood soaked in moisture. Tree branches that come to life and raise their heads, and green leaves that bloom above them. Hercules's pupils dilated at the sight unfolding before his eyes. A new life was given to the dead tree. The tree, which had regained its strength in the middle of the black forest after being chosen by Odin, was showing off its color in the black forest. That's why Odin is great. Odin, the king of Asgard. The reason he was able to come this far was not because of his strong body, nor because of the tens of thousands of magic he learned from Mimir. The reason is, creak, because Yggdrasil grows inside that guy.